up.
Okay, I'm going to call this village board meeting for October 15, 2018 to order, please. Roll call.
Joe Zitzelsberger.
Here.
Sam Ballweg. Sue Springman.
Here.
Bill Ranum.
Here.
Chris Zellner.
Here.
Bill Willems.
Here.
Aaron Moran. Here. Bill, will you turn your sign around, please?
You know who you are.
You know who you are.
Thank you.
So much work. Oh.
Did we get everybody? I'm sorry. We got-
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Confirmation of open meeting compliance, public postings, official notices, and online availability. Julie?
Yes, I'd like to confirm that we were publicly posted. Our official notices were provided to the property owners as well as to the newspaper. And it was made available online last Wednesday.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have consent agenda. Would anybody like anything pulled, or I'd look for a motion?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Motion by Joe Zitzelsberger.
Second.
Second by Bill Random. Any other comments? Call the question, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Next, we have public comment. Is there anyone here that would like to address the board on an issue that's not on the agenda for this evening?
No, I have none.
Okay. Hearing none out there as well, I'll take that as a no. Todd, any comments for you this week?
We got a long agenda. Let's just roll.
Okay, moving on. Presentations, presentation from Safe Communities. If you want to introduce yourself and,
Be delighted to. My name is Cheryl Waunakee. I'm Director of Safe Communities. We're an injury prevention coalition here in Dane County, and I just wanted to introduce the organization. We have some also partners locally that maybe can attest or not to the work that we do. We work closely with Chief Plendel and also with the Senior Center to try to prevent injuries in Dane County. So Safe Communities is an injury, as I mentioned, injury prevention coalition. We're based on a World Health Organization model where you look at the top causes of injury in your community, and then you build partnerships to address them. So we actually have colleagues in Nebraska that work to prevent rattlesnake bites. It just kind of depends on what's going on in your community. So in Dane County, so Renee, could I ask you to? Yeah, okay. So in Dane County, as in much of the state, our top causes of injury are drug overdose. So in particular, the opioid overdose epidemic has really hit Dane County very hard. It's our #1 cause of injury death now, exceeding traffic crashes. Traffic crashes still are a significant issue, particularly with younger drivers, which is why we have the Alive at 25 program, which is a program that municipal court judges, including here in Waunakee, refer young drivers to. Suicide prevention is another effort that we work on, and elder falls. So those are the top causes of injury in Dane County. We are a coalition, so the thing about Safe Communities is that we're not building a staff empire. We're really trying to integrate a lot of the work that's already happening. We have all the healthcare organizations involved, all the law enforcement agencies, fire EMS, schools, churches. So there's actually more than 300 different organizations involved. And as I mentioned, our mission is really about building partnerships to address these top causes of injury. And our vision is to make Dane County a safer place. We also have a pretty great reputation nationally as an innovative organization. So we have some national grants and have received national awards for the work that we're doing together. So as I mentioned, these are our top causes of injury in Dane County. Some of the things that we've accomplished together, and I mean together, you have a med drop box here in Waunakee that collects an awful lot of medications, and Chief Plendel and his team really are the ones doing the lion's share of that work. So we've collected more than 18 tons of medication and made those unavailable for diversion, and also taken them out of the water supply. So that's a partnership that we help coordinate. We have a project called ED to Recovery that has recovery coaches in emergency departments, so that if people overdose from opioids, there's a recovery coach there that can help them get into treatment, and we have a 90% referral to treatment program through that project. We're first in the country actually to work with gun shops to store guns for people who may be suicidal, and that's the sort of innovative partnership that we work on. there. And, you know, things like the slow down yard signs, those are safe communities efforts that are really, you know, sort of coordinated through partnerships. So, you know, here at Waunakee Police Department, we have the distribution of the signs. So, you know, again, some of the things that we've worked on together. So the MedDrop program, another program that we're real proud of, is the Parent Addiction Network. So we have a network of families that are working to support other families that are dealing with addiction. We have the Stepping On program, which is a falls prevention program that's been shown to reduce elder falls by 30%. That's you know, sort of a program that can eat up a lot of time with first responders, and there's better ways to deal with that, which is to get people into Stepping On programs. The Alive at 25 program has a great track record for reducing traffic crashes and traffic violation recidivism amongst folks that are at risk. And then our Zero Suicide Partnership is a partnership with all the healthcare organizations in Dane County to work on ways to actually reduce suicides through healthcare systems. In Michigan, the Henry Ford healthcare system created the Zero Suicide Project, which has reduced suicides among people under care by 80%. So, I mean, there's really significant outcomes there. So we coordinate that partnership. So I'd like to give you a sense of what's next. And part of what I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that we, as a coalition, have been around for 20 years. We've received grants. We've you know, raised funds through corporate sponsorships. We're sort of to the point where if we're going to continue as an organization, we need to think about a more sustainable way to keep the doors open. So we're inviting municipalities to become, in addition to partners on our projects, to become sustaining members of Safe Communities. We have some municipalities like Madison that give us $22,000 a year, and they have for some time, and we have some that contribute $500 a year. We're never going to be a pay-to-play sort of organization. You know, whatever you sort of value as a community in terms of a contribution and what, you know, what your budget allows would be wonderful. So I just wanted to sort of give you a sense of what Safe Community does, and then invite you to think about whether you're interested at this budget season to provide some financial support, and what that might be. And if not, that's great. We'll just carry on, you know, being partners in a different way. But I wanted to offer that opportunity. So in terms of the drug poisoning prevention, we're really working on improving the treatment models in Dane County. Right now, people can sit for a long time and wait for treatment. We have one parent who lost a brother. They had the funeral on the day that he was supposed to have his first appointment with his therapist. That's just unacceptable. And we have to work with healthcare systems to make sure that those sorts of tragedies aren't happening. So that's one effort that we're working on. There's a program called Life Skills that is a school district program that we can offer. We have a grant to provide that free of charge to teachers and schools if they're interested in being trained to provide that. In terms of traffic safety, this is work really that we've continued to do through municipalities, in particular law enforcement, and you know, we'll continue to offer slow down yard signs at no cost. The Live at 25 program is a program that has been shown to, again, you know, save money at the local level. And we've received some federal grants, and we'll continue to pursue those for traffic safety efforts. We'll continue to expand the gun shop project. We currently have 2 locations with gun shops that are storing guns for people who are suicidal. The healthcare systems have a flyer that I'll distribute to you to say when they're doing their safety planning with someone who's suicidal, take your gun to Essential Shooting Supplies in Mount Horeb, or to you know, this other shop in Deerfield, and they'll take it. So those sorts of connections that wouldn't otherwise happen are what we work on at Safe Communities. We have available for municipalities, if you want to distribute lock boxes, we have a grant to provide medication lock boxes for folks who may be vulnerable. And a new project is actually working with parking structures. There's research that's been done to show how to reduce suicides from parking structures. So we're working with, you know, with engineers and with builders of parking structures to implement those. the Stepping On program, we'll continue to expand that program. We're working with EMS to identify people who are frequent callers, frequent fallers, to make a direct connection between, EMS and folks that can provide services through Stepping On. And then, basically expanding to the services available to more people. And we provide funding to make those classes accessible to folks. So as I mentioned, we're offering this opportunity, to support Safe Communities for the long haul at whatever level you're interested in. We have about 20 municipalities that have signed on at one level or another. As I mentioned, there's a broad range of financial partnerships and opportunities. So I'll just put it out there for you to sort of think about and decide whether it's something that you'd like to support. And we can provide whatever other sort of documentation or things that you need to justify that if you'd like to move forward with it. Okay. So again, these are some of the returns on investment for the funding that has been invested so far in Safe Communities, and we'll continue to try to build community support and trust for the efforts that we're engaged in together. So thank you for listening and for the opportunity to present to you. This is our board and some members of our staff. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Do we need to really do much with this? Do board members have any questions? If you have any questions, you can ask them now.
I don't have a question of you, but has staff looked at this and would make a recommendation on what kind of funding? We're kind of late in our budget cycle, but something maybe that could come back to us.
Yeah,
I
this
don't know
is
what we've done.
the first I really have heard of it, so it hasn't been considered yet, but
So I will say, I met with Cheryl several weeks back, we'll just say, and she gave the presentation that she showed to you tonight. And I felt it was worthwhile to show all of you. I think it's a good program. We'd have to decide if we should participate as a municipal. They do have a lot of private support. It looks like our police chief would like to weigh in, since his hand's up. I'm assuming that's what you mean?
I would. I wasn't aware Cheryl was coming tonight, but I worked with Cheryl for probably at least the last 5 years. But an awesome program, awesome partnership with law enforcement, not only Waunakee, but in Dane County. Also working closely with fire and EMS and senior services, and this isn't one-dimensional where it's just helping police or law enforcement. This covers a lot of areas, and a lot of positive feedback on this program, and particularly the way it's run. We've been part of some other programs over the last 20 years that haven't been nearly as successful or really shown the results that Safe Communities has. So very positive experiences.
And I just wanted to add that the senior center has had the Stepping On classes, quite a few, and we do get the funding and the instructors, and they are very helpful to people, and we usually get a full class of seniors who are interested in it, because falls are a big problem.
Thank you. Dr. Ranum, would you have any comments? in regards
The
to this?
balance thing, we use all that. I mean, at the senior center, that's always, and the Tai Chi isn't always available. Well, that depends, so. And of course, dropping off at your place is a big deal, the meds, so. That's where that came from. That's a good thing.
So I felt that since we are going through our budget process right now, we don't have anything figured in. We can give whatever kind of dollar amount we'd look at or consider giving to this. I don't know if that's something we have to decide tonight that we're going to give, but we can look at this as we go through our budget process, if we want to give towards it based on how all the numbers are looking for us.
If you could provide us with a list of the 20 public supporters and their contribution amounts, that would help us consider.
Absolutely. Yep, I'll fire that off tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have license and permits. Discuss and take action on operator license applications for Guy Devitt, Catherine Leaf, and Kaylee Mukow.
They have been reviewed against our policy for operator license approvals. They have not, or at least the time we put the packet together, they had not come back from the police department. Staff would recommend that they be approved subject to successful completion of an approved responsible beverage training course and review by the Waunakee Police Department.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I recommend approval of operator license applications for Guy Devitt, Catherine Leaf, and Kaylee Muchow, subject to successful completion of an approved responsible beverage server training course and review by the Waunakee Police Department.
Okay, motion by Phil Willems,
Second.
second by Moran. Any other comments? Call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Next, we have two public hearings. Discuss and take action on certified survey map for Octopi Brewing, 1131 Unique Drive.
Yeah.
Kevin, are you introducing?
Yeah, as an introduction, this is certified
So-
This
Let
one.
me just, so we'll introduce it, then we'll open the public hearing, and then we'll have discussion.
Okay, sounds great.
Thank you.
So Todd might bring up the drawing. Occupy Brewing is looking at an expansion.
Oh, I got the,
You got it? Page 52 or 53, either one's fine. 52. So their expansion is like 37,000 square feet, and it would then overlap another adjacent lot. So the property owner has purchased the adjacent lot to allow for the expansion. The Plan Commission approved the certified survey map and also approved the site plan conditionally. There was a number of conditions they gotta satisfy. But in terms of the board action, you just need to combine these two lots into one.
Okay. And I will open up the public hearing for anybody who'd like to address. Is there any forms turned in?
I have none for this item.
Okay, it seems like about 2 minutes, so we're gonna close the public hearing. Since nobody seems to want to talk about this
Get a
one.
new watch.
My watch
Or a new joke.
isn't working tonight, so board members, any comments or questions? Does Octopi have any outstanding debt that they need to be paying to the village before we'd approve any of these?
what is Octopi? I don't believe they have anything outstanding at the current time.
I'm not aware of anything.
Okay,
Well, since we've already reviewed this and liked their expansion plans, and since they've been growing at a rapid rate and need it, I would recommend motion of approval of the Octopi CSM as presented.
motion by Phil Willems.
Second.
I'm gonna go with ladies first, so Sue second. Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. I'm actually going to reorder, I was supposed to do this before this and I forgot, to take on number 1 of new business before the next item on there. So we'll be discuss and take action to place on file proposed 2019 operating and capital improvement budget. Do I have to can I just do that or do I have to ask everybody? Okay. So
Okay.
Renee, you have the floor.
So as is our usual process, we will be discussing our first proposed budget. Sorry, I just have to get to my slide. This is a paper today. Okay, so just to review the process again, the department heads, back in June, came up with their line item budgets. They gave them to me, I went through them, discussed anything as needed. Then Todd and I met to go through those as well. We consulted with any board members as necessary. Earlier this evening at the Finance Committee meeting, they went through the budget policies. And then this is the budget proposal presentation. And then the public hearing will be scheduled for November 19th. And at that time, after that public hearing, the board will consider the final budget approval. There are a few unknowns to note at this time. The manufacturing assessed valuation is not expected until early November. This is done by the state, not by our local assessor. And so we're at the mercy of the state to get those figures. It has been fairly volatile the past few years and generally has been decreasing. So in my estimates of the tax rates, I have estimated for a decrease in this, just to be more conservative. We also don't know at this time what the levies are gonna be for the other taxing jurisdictions. This breakdown here in this chart is based on last year's taxes, but generally stays about the same, with the schools being, over 50% of the tax bill. But I believe we get the information for these other jurisdictions by the end of October, so at our November meeting, we'll know all that information. Some significant items to note. Our equalized value had a very healthy growth rate of 9.44%. This directly impacts our debt capacity because we're allowed to borrow up to 5% of our equalized value. We have an internal policy that takes it below that, but as our equalized value goes up, so does our debt capacity. We're also, with the state levy limits, we are restricted based on our net new construction, but we had, 4.1% of net new construction, so that increased our allowable levy $381,000. Once again, this 2019 budget does not qualify for a 2020 expenditure restraint payment. You may recall, some of you are newer, but the state changed its interpretation of the formula a couple years ago, which made it very difficult for growing municipalities to qualify. And that's been our situation for the past couple of years since they made that change in the interpretation. We had not budgeted for this particular revenue in the past, so it was always kind of a bonus revenue. So from a budgetary perspective, it doesn't impact our budget because we hadn't budgeted for in the past. Last year, we had done some projections of what the new library was going to cost. Particularly, these comparisons are what we thought the 2019 additional costs were going to be. And so I looked back at what we had predicted and then looked at what is in the current budget to see how close we are or what the impacts would be. So last year we thought it was going to be just over $1 million in additional 2019 costs, most of that being the debt service for the borrowings for the library. There were also some payroll increases of $169,000 or so based on 2.5 full-time equivalent staff people being added. And then there was some other operations and building costs. And this is basically for half a year. 2019 will have half the year of the operations for the new library. What ended up in the 2019 estimates are just under $1 million of additional costs. The debt is a little bit less than what we predicted. Some of that was timing issues of when it was issued, interest rates, the bids that we got. So that's a favorable change there. The payroll budget is a bit higher than what we had predicted, but it is now based on 3.14 full-time equivalent staff. And we'll talk a little bit more about those staff additions when we get back a little bit more in the slides. But the building costs and the other non-payroll operations costs were just about what was predicted last year. So what does that mean? What is the tax dollar impact per 100,000 of assessed value? Again, this is just specific to the new library purposes. Last year we had predicted that the impact on the tax bill would be $70. What we're seeing is it's actually going to be only $62. And in terms of how much more of an increase over the prior year, we were predicting a $33 increase over the prior year, and it's looking to be only a $25 increase over the prior year. Stop me at any time with questions too. Some other increases over the prior years, some of these are somewhat fixed, just going into the budget process. In 2018, we had several mid-year hires in library, police, public works. So in 2019, now they'll be on board for the full year. So that's going to add about $106,000 to our budget. Both the EMS and the fire have adopted their budgets and let us know what our share of those assessments is going to be. So EMS, we increased $36,000 or 18% over the prior year assessment. And the fire, we increased about $30,000. It's a little bit understated because they found out they had overassessed us about $9,000 last year, so we're getting that back as part of the 2019 budget. So this is our net increase after receiving that overassessed amount back. We talked a bit at the last meeting about our change in the health insurance program, moving to a high deductible plan with a HSA contribution. So that is going to add about $165,000 to our budget. The premiums with the high deductible plan are actually decreasing substantially, and the offset is that the village will now be contributing to staff HSA accounts. So that makes it go back up. And then we did have some new employees, some changes in coverage that are adding about $108,000 or so to the budget. So the net of all of that is that $165,000. The 2018 debt issue, the impact on the 2019 budget for principal and interest is about $450,000. And that's just the library piece that goes on the tax levy. So all of that together it's about $688,000 that we don't have a lot of control over, and you know, it's an increase right off the get-go.
788. You said 688?
Oh, sorry,
Is it 7 or
788, yep, sorry.
The point will come kind of around towards the end of the presentation. When you look at the bottom line of the actual budget, it's important to keep in mind how things play out with the stuff that is relatively fixed.
A couple other changes to note. The state of Wisconsin created an exemption for certain personal property taxes for machinery, tools, and patterns that are locally assessed. So they took that away and or made it tax exempt. So that decreased our assessed value by just over $6 million. We do get some state aid in 2019 to help offset that, but it's based on the 2017 valuation, so any new machinery, tools, and patterns wouldn't be accounted for there, and I think that it's not really going to grow over the years. So we're eventually this is, you know, it's harming us only a little bit now because they're giving us the aid, but in the long term, it's a hit that we're taking.
Renee, can you maybe share with the public what our assessed value is as a village? Roughly.
I think it is.
People hear 6 million and they may view that as
Yeah.
a big number.
Right, I believe, when I was looking at it earlier, I think it's 1.6 billion, but I mean, I could, yeah. It's a big number that I don't remember off the top of my head.
I think you're close to the number with that, so. I just wanted to get perspective on that $6
Yeah.
million number.
Right, so it does, 6 million seems like a large number, but it's definitely out of billions of assessed value. The second bullet here is that this budget is proposing that we shift $200,000 of public fire protection charges to the utility bills. So currently on the local or on the residential utility bill, we're already being billed 2/3 of this public fire protection charge. What we're proposing is to add the other 1/3 to the utility bill. We had surveyed some of our neighboring communities to see what they were doing, and some of our similar communities, and of some of our peers, at least, or 5 out of 8 of them had already made this shift to put all the public fire protection charges onto the utility bills. So doing this puts us more on an equal footing when people are comparing tax rates from community to community, because they already had taken it off the tax bill, so that you're not really comparing the apples to apples for that. Anything more to add?
Yeah, we definitely don't want to make light of this shift, acknowledging the fact that it's a different pocket in the same pair of pants for the ratepayer. Perspective-wise on utility bills, I think for a residential, single-family home, the current charge is
$6.
So assuming that right now that's covering 1/3 of it, or 2/3, you could see that charge going more towards 8 or 9.
Yeah.
But that's got to be factored by the Public Service Commission with utilities.
Right. And residential should be, it's based on your meter size, so commercial and manufacturing likely would have larger meters and take on a larger piece on their bill.
You might have covered it already, but to be clear, what is PFP, Public Fire Protection? It's essentially covering the cost of what it costs to get water to the hydrants, so they're ready to go the moment the fire department pulls it.
That's a good point.
Todd, doesn't the utility cover more than Waunakee too? Is it just
Yes.
Waunakee residents? If it
Yeah,
does-
but I'm not sure
Fire
for those
district.
I'm not sure if the town has to make a decision differently.
Right,
For
I would
outside
think
the-
that this charge would be based on what municipality the person
Where
was
it's
in.
from. Okay.
So, because,
Yeah,
If-
the service,
So this covers our share of the Waunakee fire assessment, the fire district assessment?
Not the district.
this is a charge that the utilities have
hydrant.
to
Alright, I
keep
gotcha.
the hydrants ready to go. It actually,
Probably just
other than the fire
Which is fine.
getting benefit, because when they go to fight a fire, the water is there, this is really between us and the utilities. So we were paying the utilities a third, this 200,000, they were putting the other 400,000 on the utility bills already. Now we're saying, put the whole 600,000 on the utility bills.
Probably should have been.
Some of the reason that when Chris and I talked about this concept, as people are choosing where to live in Dane County, if they consider the factor of tax rate in making their choice, one of many factors you would think, with the majority of our neighboring communities, and some actually are considering a change
Yep,
just
some are.
like this. The apples to apples comparison to us seems important if we're being balanced by families looking to relocate, or individuals.
Okay. Here's a slide that talks about where we are in terms of our compliance with our own internal debt service policies. I touched on it before, but we have a policy to remain below 50% of the state limit, which again is 5% of the total equalized value. At the end of 2018, we should be at around 42% of our internal limit. Last year at this time, we were thinking that by the end of 18, we'd be getting really close to our internal limit. But with that strong equalized value growth, it gave us a little more of a cushion to be, well under our limit now. A second policy that we have is to remain below 30% of the debt service costs, to be only below 30% of the total village expenditures. And even with our new borrowings and such, we're gonna be under 20%. And then to keep our equalized tax rate below $2.25 per thousand for debt, and we're only gonna be at $1.36. So we're in full compliance with all of our debt policies.
The other thing I pointed out at finance, can I go back to that last screen? Can you go back to that last screen?
Yep.
So we're close to $40 million as far as our debt. In about 6 years, we'll be down closer to 20 million, which puts us in a very, very strong financial position. We don't, at least that I haven't seen in the near future, that we have any significant debt that we have to take on once our library project is done. So we should see that number drop pretty quickly.
Yes, thanks for that. Just to go back to our assessed valuation question, Julie was able to look it up, and it is like 1.5 billion is our total assessed valuation.
Without manufacturing.
Oh, that's without manufacturing.
Without manufacturing.
So with manufacturing, it adds another, that's the number we don't know yet, but maybe that's where I was getting closer to the 1.6 in my estimates. So last year, I guess I can stop here for a second, we had come up with some ways to utilize funds that was gradual and fiscally prudent, and so we're continuing some of those policies, and I'll go through those now. So the Village Center, we collect an impact fee that goes to pay the Village Center debt, and we've been collecting that since the Village Center was built. And so last year we looked at that and said, well, we really should start using some of that, the funds on hand to help pay down the debt instead of just fully relying on the general fund levy to cover that. And so we revisited our plan from last year, and because we've had really strong impact fee collections, we did increase the amount that we're using. So 2025 is the year that the debt is fully paid off, and so our proposal kind of gets us down to that point. We still will be able to collect these Village Center impact fees until we've collected enough to sort of reimburse ourselves for that sort of far right green column, where the general fund levy has had to cover some of the costs because we didn't have enough impact fees. So even once the debt is paid off, we'll be able to continue collecting and essentially reimburse ourselves back. But this helps reduce the need for the levy if we can start to use some of these impact fees. In terms of our general fund, we have a policy to keep our unassigned fund balance between 20 and 25% of the next year's operating expenditure budget. And so we had started this history, and I continued on for 2017, or added that in there. We're still well above the highest part of our range. And so in the next few slides, we'll see how we have some ideas to use some fund balance to, again, get closer to what our policy is. So one of the things we had done last year is we increased all the PAYGO funds that we have, and funded it partially by levy and partially by some of the excess fund balance. And so we're planning to continue that policy, or kind of that plan that we laid out. So we revisited that, and since at the end of 2018 we're predicting that we're going to be at 36% of our unassigned fund balance, we decided to push back the step up, if you will, back a year and keep the funding for 2019 the same split, $55,000 from the levy and $165,000 from fund balance to fund those. And then we're still, even through 2022, with conservative estimates, still think that we'll be above our policy, but that gives us some cushion for any other things that might come up in those years. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some other uses that we've come up with, but at the end of 2019, we're predicting we'll be at 29% of that policy. So still above the range, but, you know, trying to gradually get it closer to the range. So here's some targeted use of fund balance, I'm calling it. Again, the pay-go enhancements from the previous slide are $165,000. We had talked, I can't remember if it was at the full board or perhaps at the finance committee, to look to get some assistance for some longer-term capital planning. Longer-term meaning, we have a 5-year capital plan, but, you know, should we go out even beyond that and look at costs that currently we don't have a funding source for? We're proposing to use some of our credit card rebate to do that. And then we're also looking to fund the Rip Park tennis court improvements out of fund balance, because again, it's a one-time cost. And those are the types of things you would use fund balance for. You don't want to use it for your general annual operations costs.
On that one, I just note, if you recall, when we did our capital planning discussion, we identified all the projects, and essentially all but one of them, we satisfactorily found funding sources for those items of greatest need. And then there was this big elephant in the room at the bottom of the table, 440, without a funding source. And together with Chris, as we reviewed where that balance stood, and then if going back a couple slides, that plan to drop it down, we saw capacity to achieve this plan while at the same time accomplishing that significant project.
Right. So even with all of that use of fund balance, again, we're looking to estimate that our 2019 unassigned fund balance is still going to be at 29%. So very healthy. Now getting into some of the nuts and bolts of the what's in the budget. I suppose I should pass out. So from the board packet to tonight, there were a couple of changes. So I have some new summary sheets. This goes down. But I've already updated the slides to include those. So as I mentioned, the EMS just adopted their budget on Thursday night. I didn't find out the information until Friday morning, which was after the board packet had gone out. And so I've made that change. And then in discussions with Todd and Chris, we had originally had in the budget to change the dental contribution by employees. And this budget that we're proposing tonight has set it back to the way it was. So, sorry if that's confusing. Sue and Chris already, it's the same thing I passed out at finance.
All right, I don't need to.
So you'll see some changes in the numbers from what was in the board packet. But this is what we're presenting tonight. So our tax rate, our assessed tax rate is increasing about 3.61% to 7.007 per 100,000. It is slightly above our 5-year average, which is 6.669. But as we look at our equalized value, which is the fair market value, that tax rate is actually going down about 2.5%, and is below the 5-year average. This demonstrates how our assessed values aren't keeping up with our equalized values, that fair market value. In 2019, we'll be having the revaluation, the market, what is it called? The
Interim market.
interim market or review. So that should bring the assessed value closer to the equalized value, and we should see these tax rates getting closer after that time.
Yeah, maybe to offer a little bit, mostly for the citizens in the room, about this process of revaluation and what you can expect when we're here at this same chart next year. The outcome of a reval, especially in a growing community where there's market demand, is that property values are going to be right-sized and increased. In some cases, they might end up balancing out. Maybe some particular neighborhoods, the property value in the sales aren't moving as fast as other neighborhoods. And then the revaluation process will draw those closer together in relation to one another. It doesn't draw the values together, but it creates fairness in how they're assessed. So what's going to happen, as you can actually sort of see here, our last reval, Julie, was in
2012.
2012. So you saw the phenomenon of the assessed value and equalized value being very close, those first two bars on the left, which is essentially the best case scenario in right-sizing our budget and comparing properties with one another. But as time goes by and we don't reval, market conditions keep changing around us. That then causes that assessed rate to increase, so you started to see the divide. When your divide is so great in the state's perspective, if it's over 90% differential, then community has 4 years to come back into compliance within the 90%. That's where the reval takes place. That's when the reval takes place. So what should happen next year is we should see these two bars come back together. Generally, what that will look like is the assessed tax rate coming back down. So instead of 7.007, you're going to see something perhaps around 5.96, possibly around 6. So that's going to drop. And the levy, however, is going to remain the same. Well, reasonable expenses incurred, but everybody's then going to be paying their fair share of the levy. So you can expect next year a drop in the tax rate.
Right.
Although
All
your
things being
values,
equal.
although your values will go up. The folks who end up paying more, generally, after reval, are those who have made significant improvements to their home that will cause their property value to increase at a greater pace, a greater chunk than their neighbors.
Excellent explanation.
We'll work hard. Well, you won't be here to work hard. We'll work hard over the course of the process to communicate what this means to taxpayers as we go through. I think several years ago we did a YouTube video and other things, so we'll work hard to communicate the process and help people understand. It is complex. Sorry, big intermission there.
No, that's okay. It's a very hard concept to understand. So again, we're showing a 3.61% increase. This equates to $25 per $100,000 of value increase. So the average village home, as of the most recent valuation on 1/1/18, is now about $305,000. So you can kind of see some scenarios at the bottom of what the estimated tax bill for just the village share would be on a $100,000 home. $300,000, which is the average, would be about $2,100, and then a $500,000 home would be $3,500. We wanted to point out at this point, we had talked earlier about the public fire protection, and so just to give you some sense of if we didn't choose to move that onto the utility bill, the increase, instead of $25, it would have been $38 per 100,000, or approximately $39 on the average village home. So that's somewhat comparable to what we think the impact would be on a residential utility bill. If it's about $3 a month for 12 months, that'd be about $36. So again, it's as Todd said, it's just a shift that, the people aren't, you know, and we talked a little bit about, how different, meter sizes will be charged differently, but for a residential, it shouldn't mean too much more in terms of dollars paid. Some other budgetary information. The end of 2018, I go through and I do an estimate of what I think, how we're going to end up. And currently, I believe we're going to have a surplus of about $108,000. To put that in perspective, last year, when we did the 2018 budget, we had actually planned for a loss of $315,000. And that was some of our use of fund balance. So we're overcoming that loss that we had planned for in our budget. Primarily, it's due to revenues coming in higher than budget. We budget our revenues very conservatively, and in some cases don't budget anything for particular revenues, like our credit card rebate, donations, some state aids we don't know if we're getting, so those all come in over budget. Our building permit revenue, we budget very conservatively, and we've had really strong growth here. In our investment income too, we don't want to count on a certain amount as rates tend to fluctuate, so we have significant overages in these particular line items. Whereas when we look at our expenditures, we're only about, just under $10,000 over. Again, this is the prediction for the end of 2018. And there was no one department or line item that was significant there. It was really a few $100s here and there that added up across all departments. Looking at just the general fund, which is where we tend to spend most of our time looking, the expenditures are going up about 8%, or $718,000. This is where we kind of look at that previous slide, some of those costs that go in there, fire, EMS, the change in the health insurance, the change with the library, some of the transfers to the capital, pay-go accounts. We have the new hires and step increases, and all of that factors into that number. If we took some of those fixed costs out and the library, we'd be closer to a 3%, just under a 3% increase in our general fund expenditures.
Add one note of perspective here. In a growing community like Waunakee, this shouldn't be a surprise. In order to provide the services that are expected for a greater population demands greater expense, added positions, more vehicles, those types of things. Some might wonder, why doesn't this, what expenses are going up 8%, why isn't the levy, why isn't the tax rate going up 8%? Wouldn't that make sense? Well, that's where the value of being in a growing community is of great support to all of us, because this newly added value, the 90 or so homes that were built last year and the other value added to the community is absorbing a sound chunk of that 8.13 in increased expenses. So it should make sense with that in mind.
Yeah, and this gets at exactly what Todd's talking about. The general fund levy alone is only going up 4.58%, again, for all those factors, plus, that we get some additional revenues to help where we don't have to levy for all of the increased cost. So the general fund levy, the increase is just under the 5-year average for the increase. We also put on here, so the state makes us stay under certain levy limits, and we don't actually levy up to our limit, and we haven't probably since the levy limits were imposed. But just wanted to note that we do have a cushion where we're below our levy limit by 1.7 million. You know, technically, we could levy an additional amount there, but obviously that would have huge impacts on our assessed tax rate. So I just wanted to point that out. Now we get into some more fun, and people other than myself can do more of the talking. We're gonna go through some departmental slides, and they're each gonna just chime in from where they are on their own slides. I guess first starting with Todd.
And the administration department isn't that remarkable. Oh, don't use that quote. Didn't come out the way I was hoping. The administration budget isn't particularly remarkable here. I want to let Adam talk a moment about some of the HR efforts that we're making, and it might actually be a good time. We referenced the new health savings account model we're going to. I think it'd be a good moment for him to maybe update you on our progress with employees on that too.
Sure. So we, starting
Adam,
yes,
if you could say like your name and stuff for the camera, so
Yes.
people in the community can put a name to a face.
you bet. Adam Bentley. I am the Assistant Administrator and the HR Manager for Waunakee. So from an HR standpoint, in the last couple of years, we've really tried to reinforce some of the positive components of our culture, and so I've focused on doing some programming for staff, fun things that just kind of bring departments together and cross department boundaries. In a week, we're doing a pumpkin carving contest. We did a Elf on the Shelf contest last year as well. We've done things like training programs. We did sexual harassment training this year. Of course, we consistently do training from safety perspective as well. So we want to maintain our commitment to those programmings because it's important to support our staff and support a team-based atmosphere here in Waunakee. With relation to the HSA, last year or 2 weeks ago, we presented that model change. It's been intense, an intense education process for our staff. By tomorrow's end, I will have met with I will have been to every single department. I will have conducted, we did a YouTube video, 20-minute YouTube presentation. I just checked the viewership for that today. We have 75 folks on our health insurance. I have 80 people who viewed that video. I've set up roughly 10 or so individual meetings with staff. They can actually get onto my calendar and self-select to meet with me at their convenience. I go to them. Every retiree has been contacted. And so we had a month long to kind of ramp up, and I can tell you that we have done our best to reach out, and we'll continue to do so through the end of open enrollment, which is at the end of November. So it's been intense, but it's been absolutely necessary. So that's all I have.
Julie, clerk. Some things that we hope to be happening next year. Electronic poll books were an option for us this year in 2018 for our elections. For lots of reasons, we opted not to do that, so we moved them to 2019. We'd also like to make preparations for an additional polling place at the new library, and we've worked with staff there to have that option to be able to have one more polling location going into the 2020 elections and move some of our voting activity away from the village center. Just while it's a great facility and they take very good care of us, we're putting about 8,000 people through that location on election day or their ballots. So it's going to be a nice option to be able to move some of that into the new library and spread it out a little bit. It's also Census 2020, and that doesn't happen without a lot of pre-walk around and knock on the door kind of work. So we're confirming addresses right now. so that as they begin to prepare the surveys that they send out, that they will have good information to do that with. Todd mentioned the revaluation already with the interim market update. That'll be a good thing for the village. And there will be a transition to the new village clerk in January. That should not be a surprise to anybody. It's been happening for a couple of years already, but there, that brings good things, new ideas, and, I think some moving ahead for the village with new staff.
Thank you. Sue, Community Services?
Sue McDade from the Community Services Department. Update from the recreation side of the house, the Brewers are up 1-0 at the end of the first inning. Just in case you wanted to know.
Who's recording the game?
So we continue to offer the core services from our department that include health and fitness activities, youth and adult sports, enrichment programs for people of all ages, and then community use of our facility, of course. In 2019, one of our places that we really want to grow is programming opportunities for youth, teens, and young adults. So we work with partnerships throughout the village and any opportunity that we have to try to make this a great and fun place to live and play. We also have been working with the library and the village hall staff on a collaborative approach to building maintenance. Todd had me when he said every building in the village should be cared for like the village center is. Would you help? It was really smooth. So we've been working together to try to take our model for building care to the new library and then here to Village Hall as well in 2019. We're replacing the village center vehicle that our staff shares to use for all sorts of different purposes. The original pickup truck was purchased in 2007. So we'll be working on selecting a new vehicle that not only meets our needs but also fits within the fleet of vehicles that the village owns as a whole. And then finally, we'll just continue with our multi-year fitness equipment replacement plan, trying to make sure that we always have the most up-to-date, well-kept, well-maintained fitness equipment to offer our customers.
Economic Development?
Maybe if we could, before we leave each department, can we take a pause and see if there's any questions for that particular department? Would that be all right, Chris?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess any of the previous departments that have spoken?
Sorry.
Okay, then we'll carry on.
Oh, it's me again. The village made a $35,000 commitment to the barn refurbishment out at Schumacher Farm. We're entering our third year of that commitment, with the final payment being $5,000. That's included in the budget here. Adam is charged with leading a process to update our wayfinding. So around the village are these little blue signs with our logo and pointing different ways. Stuff has moved since we last did those, and things have been added too. So we're going to be working together with other groups in the village to update that signage. That both the plan update and the equipment, the new signs, are budgeted in the economic development budget. And then we'll continue our business engagement work. Any questions on
Todd?
economic?
Nope, okay.
Engineering, our plan is to continue the use of the PAGO funding. We anticipate a budget of about $1 million for road construction projects next year. Our emphasis over the next 2 years is going to be resurfacing projects, much like the Holiday Drive project. As a comparison, we get about 10 times as much done when we only do a resurfacing rather than a full reconstruct. But there's certainly less road projects that are candidate that meet those which would be eligible for those types of projects. It means that they're not getting new curb and gutter, or not getting a new sidewalk, but they are getting a new surface, which we do expect to last at least another 15 years. We did some computer modeling that reduces our annual rate by about $40,000 to the TMDL, at least the village's share, and then our operating fund is staying about the same.
Questions for
Questions
Kevin? Okay.
You guys are being easy.
Finance, I think I mentioned this in an earlier slide, but we're looking at a capital planning assistance project. Again, kind of looking a little bit more at some other potential revenue sources and looking at what the impact would be on future tax rates, were we to do borrowings for any particular projects. And then with the modeling that someone such as Ellers would have available, they can look out easier beyond the 5 years that we do right now, so we can have something longer term, and this could be something that we would then have available to update ourselves each year after that. We're looking to upgrade our accounting software. This gets us on the latest version that we have before they stop supporting the version that we have. We don't want to be in a position where we have outdated software. And then by doing this, they're throwing in that we'll automatically always get the upgrades going forward, so we'll always be on the latest version with no additional cost to the village to do those upgrades. And then our audit fees, we were able to negotiate a modest $500 increase in our finance budget. Questions for me?
When was the last time we would have done like a capital planning?
So we do a 5-year capital plan every year, but we haven't done a lot of exploring of other potential revenue sources other than what we already have, either in the levy or borrowing. So we do have a 5-year capital plan that we kind of roll forward every year. This would be a little more robust of a project, looking at some things that probably are in the department's, the back of their mind, what they would like to do, but never kind of make it into the current year budget. All right, library.
All right, Eric Plum from the library, and I'm going to try to not say too much because my department has probably the biggest increase tonight because we are moving to the new building mid-year next year. And the largest changes to our budget are staff increases. As you'll recall, over the past few years, we've been ramping up our staff to meet the needs of the new building. In 2017, we added the adult services and outreach manager position. This year, we are adding the additional youth services librarian position. She just started on October 1st. And then next year, around June, we hope to add a full-time building maintenance supervisor. That's a position that is analogous to the one that Dwayne Stats has at the Village Center, somebody who will be on site every day and who can coordinate the care of the building. We knew going in that we wanted to take as good of care of the new library as what Sue and her people do at the Village Center, where you can go into it in 10 years and not know that it's a 10-year-old building. So we've been adding those positions. So this new full-time person would start tentatively around June 1st, right around the time we begin our move. The additional staff that, and you saw in the earlier slide how we were slightly above our FTE and additions than what we had thought. As Sue had mentioned, we've been working with Todd and Adam and Village Center staff as to kind of how could we adopt a similar maintenance model as the Village Center. And it turned out that the most cost-effective manner would be to bring everything in-house. And working with, by divvying it up between the Village Hall and the new building at the library, we came up with a plan to add 24 hours per week of building supervisory staff, which is the name that Sue's department has, for the maintenance people, the people that come in and clean the building, do minor fixes and that sort of thing. And then, so they'd be at the new building for 24 hours a week, starting July 1st when we start. And then they'd also be at this facility for 6 hours per week, and the cost would be divvied up between the two departments. So that's the change. We weren't looking at bringing cleaning in-house when we began the initial estimates for the new building budget. But we did find our current service provider, our current cleaning service provider in a new 40,000 square foot facility would be comparable to having in-house staff doing the cleaning. And I think there's quite a bit of difference in what you get for what you pay for with an in-house person versus a contractor. So that's that change. Building costs will go up. Certainly the supplies, the utilities, the HVAC costs. We're moving to a facility 3 times larger, so we'll see those increases. And then most of the operating costs additionally will stay pretty flat. We are going to be spending a bit more on materials and a bit more on programming, but nothing too radical. Because we know that certainly in next year's budget with a half year in the new facility, and then in 2020 when all of these all of these new positions we're paying for 12 months of them, it's a significant increase. So we thank you for your support.
Questions for Eric? Is there any events that are happening in the upcoming near future that you might want people to come to?
Yes. If you haven't been by Madison Street, please come on Friday morning, 11 o'clock. You can go onto the site, go up to the building. I'll be there. The village president will be there. Todd will be there to answer questions, and so we can get an update on construction. Take a look at it. It's pretty impressive, if I do say so myself.
Okay, thank you.
Police.
Hi, I'm Kevin Plundle from the police department. Looking to add an officer next year, mid-year. Several reasons that listed this. We've been, for the last 20 years, we've been averaging a new officer about every 30 to 36 months. This position will put us at 24 months from the last position we added. Several reasons are listed on here. One of the biggest ones is FMLA. We have a significantly younger workforce than we had 5 to 7 years ago, and starting families, and our projection for 2019 and speaking with staff is we're likely going to be missing about 12 months total of officer time just from FMLA alone. And to put it in perspective, looking back at our workforce and some of those folks retiring with a lot of vacation time and getting newer employees in, I thought we were probably going to be pretty much better off on the schedule. And we actually went a number of dates in 2016 and 2017 that we had 3 people off on the same day with FMLA. That's likely going to happen again in 2019. Also, our training schedule, we're obviously involved in a lot more training. We do a lot of de-escalation training, much more so than in years past. Active shooter training, we do a lot of training dealing with mental health, crisis intervention training, using up a significant amount of time and resources for us to do those trainings are obviously critical for us. And putting into perspective, dealing with mental health crisis, we've all seen the news, and we've also had active shooter recently close by us. We also, which has been a shift in law enforcement, we're also working with neighboring agencies much more now. In the last several months alone, we spent significant time in Sun Prairie right after their situation, their tragic incident happened, and then for the days following when security was needed. We also had people at the Middleton active shooter situation last month, and then for the days afterward when the crime scene needed to be secured. And within the community here, we've served a number of search warrants this year, drug search warrants. We've also served search warrants on some other cases, and then of course we had a homicide this year, which has used up significant resources for us. This position is really not going to be an increase in services for us with the volume of people that are likely going to be gone in 2019. It's more of a be able to, I guess, keep the services that we have. We've been able to maintain a level that we've always been rated in one of the, usually the top 5 to 10 safest communities in Wisconsin, and that's kind of what we're hoping to continue to achieve. And from a taxpayer standpoint, I provided some documents, I don't know if it was in this packet
They
or
are
not,
in the
but
packet.
they are, okay. Just for myself being a taxpayer and, getting a lot of feedback from community members, that document showing our comparable communities in Wisconsin of populations 10,000 to 16,000 have police departments, we're dead last, and this won't change anything. I think we'll still be able to hold down the fort at last, among what others spend in Wisconsin on police services. And there's a document in there about policing and services in Dane County for all the communities. And we're actually second last in Dane County for everybody, not just the similar sized communities. So really looking to just, I guess, maintain the services we've got. The other thing for the future, talking about FMLA, we've got 3 of our most tenured employees that are going to be leaving by the end of 2020. Our workforce is going to be getting much younger. So FMLA leave time in the next 3 to 5 years in the police department, I get a feeling will be far more than what it is even right now. So just something for future reference. In a reference to the increase for a part-time office person, looking to increase our budget from $20,000 to $30,000. We currently have our part-time police officers on that budget. That extra $10,000 would be for an office person. We've had the same 2 office staff since 1997. We've had 2 full-time office staff. Looking to get some relief for them and get some assistance for what they do. Obviously, things have changed substantially in the police department, the volume of work that's been created in the last 22 years since then to now. I've also gotten some feedback from a number of people over the years about wanting the hours of the police department increased. We have a lot of traffic in and out. We have a lot of phone calls after 6 o'clock, which is kind of our cutoff for when our office hours end. And a lot of folks have said it'd be nice if you had somebody there until 8, 9, or 10 o'clock at night on weekdays. So we'll see how that goes, but mainly just to help with the paperwork and kind of relieve people when there's people are on vacation, just to kind of make that transition smoother. So that's about it.
Questions? So for those in the audience, if you haven't seen this sheet, you didn't look online, it's actually very impressive. And I would just want to say that, how do you do it?
It works.
There's such a drastic difference between the rest of the communities and what we have. And when you look at the amount of police officers we have for our size community compared to the others, I'll just say congratulations on the job you're doing. Well done. Especially since I know you're retiring in the near future, somewhat near future. Can I say that?
You sure can.
I just did. On that front. Any other questions for Kevin?
Chief, do you want to introduce your lieutenant?
Yeah, Lieutenant Adam Kreitzman. Adam was promoted to lieutenant mid-2017. He may be here as part of a learning process.
High standard.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Bill Frederick, Public Works and Parks. Basically, we're just kind of looking to continue to maintain. We had an increase in our de-icing, a lot to do with price increase as well as additional streets. So we've seen somewhat of an increase in that in the budget. Repairs, equipment repairs, obviously just due to the increase in purchasing of parts and materials for maintaining the equipment we have. We had security to Centennial Park this year, so we're looking to do Wi-Fi out there to hopefully be able to help in viewing those cameras from, whether it be from police department or the Public Works, just to see what's going on and when we have something that goes on up there. Other things is we've taken our leaf truck and actually it's our tripper truck and modified it to where we'll be able to pick up leaves, so we'll be able to do leaves longer than we have in the past, where we always had to have a cutoff with leaves to get ready for the winter season. With what we've did this year with one of our leaf boxes, that we'll be able to go at least till December 1st in picking up leaves and and continue to be as efficient as we, find ways to be as efficient as we can moving forward.
Questions for Bill? Do you want to make note to everybody that the bathrooms in all the parks were closed
Closed as
today?
of today.
Which is another one. So that's usually a complaint we get from residents.
And we ran that 2
people
weeks
using
longer
it.
this year
Yeah,
than
2
we have in the past.
So, that's all protective and preventative in nature for our shelters, so. All right.
Cindy?
Cindy Mosman, Senior Services Director. The numbers in the first point have changed. I just found out today that because Dane County Exec Parisi put a COLA in and also increased the amount of funding for case management services in Dane County. Instead of a $4,000 increase, we'll be getting $13,500. So it's a nice little increase for us. So our Dane County funding for nutrition and case management will go to $95,500. And that's based on usage, but it's also based on his 3.5 COLA that's going on in Dane County. The additional Dane County funding for case managers to provide supportive home chore, Dane County and the Area Agency on Aging have provided funding in Madison for home chore services for seniors. So the rural focal points, we've been fighting for quite a while to get some of that funding to make it more fair for everyone throughout the county. So they don't have a number for us yet, but we will be getting funding that the case managers can use. Getting someone home chore services in their home helps them stay in their own home. And so we're excited to be getting some kind of funding for that in 2019. And I just put some statistics in there. We have numbers going up in our usage and just a small request for an increase.
Questions for Cindy? Thank you.
Okay. Village Board's last one.
The maintaining our budget on doing things for employee appreciation as well as board training. And I would, a couple board members have gone to League of Wisconsin Municipalities events or conferences. Want to continue to offer that and encourage you, if you haven't taken advantage of those opportunities, that the village is happy to provide you that opportunity. Our newsletter continues, 3 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And we've added a revenue stream over the past couple years with some business card type advertising within the newsletter. The Polco service was a contract we entered into a little over a year ago. It was a new service, a product invented by a company in Madison to engage residents in a survey process. Our experience, and Adam assisted me with this, in running a couple of survey processes, is that we got very little citizen engagement in the process, despite our effort through social media and the newspaper with press releases to encourage participation. So what we found in terms of a communication process, that utilizing social media, even Nextdoor now, more officially using Nextdoor, our website, YouTube, that we're pursuing options that aren't costing us more. That's not to say that maybe a survey tool like Polco at some point in the future might be of use to us, but we've found the participation to be disappointingly low, despite our work to promote it. So we're not continuing the contract, or we're proposing not to.
Okay. Any more questions for Todd on that? Okay.
Okay, thanks to all the department heads for their input there. Now we'll talk a little bit more in depth on the personnel expenses. As has been the case in the past, staffing accounts for a huge part of the general fund budget, 59%, and 26% of our total budget across all funds. So what happens with the personnel costs really has a large impact on our overall budget. This budget that we're proposing tonight does have a cost of living adjustment of 2%. That would go into effect on 1/1/19. And that currently is for all staff, including those in the police union. That contract expires at the end of December of 2018, and it's currently being negotiated. But I had to put something in the budget, and so that is our best estimate at this point. So that 2% equates to about $105,000 increase in the budget. You'll see the next bullet for every 0.5% wage change impacts the levy by about $25,000 or 0.015 on the tax rate. That would be up or down. And just a note on the step adjustments per our wage and summary plan, just people moving up to their next steps, that is almost $87,000 of an increase in the budget. On the benefits side, we've already talked about the changes to the health insurance and what that increase means. And then the Wisconsin retirement contribution, the state has let us know that there will be a small increase in our percentage, which will add about $15,000 to the budget. We've already talked a little bit about some of the proposed positions, and in the packet was memos on both of these areas. But the police department, currently, we have it in there as a September 1st hire, and that would be about $29,000. The building maintenance supervisor would be a June 1st hire, just prior to when the library would open. And then the part-time building supervisors would be close to about a $20,000 increase for those positions. Then when we look ahead to when these positions are full-time in 2020 for the full year, or not full-time, but in the budget for the full year, it's going to be about a $99,000 impact on that next year's budget. Just to kind of put it all in perspective, we always have to kind of think ahead for those mid-year hires. Todd, do you want to talk a little bit about this slide?
Yeah, it's hard to see. So left to right, 3 graphs, with the one on the left being all Dane County villages and cities in 2015, sorted by the equalized tax rate. So the equalized tax rate is on the far, the right column of that left table. So the highest being Madison with an equalized tax rate of 9.2, the lowest being Rockdale at 4.4. Their Waunakee was at about 6.3. In the bottom quarter, easily, I would say bottom quarter there. And we've hung out and sustained our spot, I would say, in the bottom third. In 2016, which is the middle table, we were at 6.1. And then 2017, also at 6.1, but there is a shift with the communities around us that nudged us up just a bit. So the point here being that we're hanging out, we remain hanging out in the bottom third of all Dane County communities.
Thank you.
I wanted to I always like this meeting because the whole team is here. And I'm really proud of these folks. They do a great job for our community, for you, and for our residents. And I think by virtue of the successful fiscal year, where we continue to establish balances.
Nice to be appreciated.
It certainly is.
Good for you.
That's quite right.
Very good.
I'm done. I don't have nothing else to say. I'm gonna turn off my computer right now.
I have a question. Our fire safety budget. At last meetings that I've been going to, they keep talking about their increase, and we're budgeting down. I realize we're shifting 200,000, but still, we're budgeting a decrease here in the levy of over $100,000, and I think it's going to climb.
Where are you seeing a decrease in the levy?
Right here in their fire protection.
Oh, that's the water.
That's not fire district,
Yes,
That's different. That's the utility.
that's the water mains.
fire hydrants.
It says total fire protection, that we're gonna be down, I know, realize the 200,000 is a shift.
Using the page in the budget document. What page is that in the budget? document?
90.
90 of the packet.
Oh, why that looks strange there is, you may recall that in 2018, very late in the process, the fire district came to us and said they needed to get the new air packs.
Okay.
And so there is an overall decrease in the fire district budget because we don't have to worry about that one-time cost of the air packs.
Okay.
So the assessment piece of the 2018 budget, the assessment went up a little bit, but the air packs dropped off. So I see your confusion there.
Okay.
Does that help with that? Okay.
And it's those types of knowledgeable answers that we've been getting from Renee. This is, how many, is this your third?
This is my third budget. I've just been here just over 2 years, but my third budget cycle.
You arrived like right in the middle of one of our budget processes, but Renee's done a really nice job. I know I've gotten unsolicited feedback from my department heads and other members of the village team that they really enjoy working with her. So kudos, Renee, on the good work with our budget as well. Thank you.
Any other questions? I would just make the comment that when I first arrived for our initial budget meeting, it was eye-opening, shocking, scary, and it's always that way when you come into that, because there's everything here, and then things get whittled away. And a couple things that I'm just gonna point out, we can still modify, obviously, within this. There were some recommendations to keep at zero. It's always best to keep at zero, as we all know from when we've done our budget. And one of the things was to reduce our COLA amount for the employees from 2 to 1%, which would have dropped that rate significantly, and I didn't feel that it was appropriate to do that. It's just not the right time to our employees to cut them off. I think that's important. We're making changes within their health plan, which is another reason we talked about the dental plan, that there was gonna be we were gonna share within that. We took that back out as well. So some of those increases you're seeing as a result of those changes that I felt were important within the budget. So I wanted you guys to be aware of that, those changes, and where we ended up at this point is reasonable for our budget.
Yeah, the raw figure had a 10% rate increase. And that's raw, unfiltered.
Right, and there was a
department
lot of,
estimates.
at that point, there was a lot of unknowns, fire, EMS, you know.
That's the first number that
Yeah.
got you excited. So then we worked together with the departments. You were very clear on some things that were important to you, and then we had to work with the department heads and get creative in other areas, which is now where we've arrived.
So I will say well done to our staff as well, submitting good budgets as well again. And do we have to make any recommendations tonight?
Well, did you want to?
So we have a little bit more, if there aren't any particular questions for staff, again, if you want to provide us with any direction in terms of changes, like Chris said, this is certainly not the final budget. That won't be until November, so there is time to make some changes. I have the rule of thumb there. A $10,000 change in the levy is about a 0.1% change in the rate over the prior year. But again, the bottom line is still a moving target until we know that manufacturing assessment. And, if that comes in favorable, that will directly reduce our assessed tax rate.
I would say, and maybe this is the time, actually, since we're gonna go to work on finalizing some things. For the group that was here and presented and requested funding, the notion of, can we give them $1,000 or whatever? The answer is, of course we can. The extreme minor blip of an $1,000 impact, just for example, is barely noticeable, quite honestly, in the mass of our entire budget. I'm not gonna diminish that, it certainly adds to our expense, but the impact on moving the rate would be $1,000 would move it 0.01% related to the prior year.
Yeah,
So-
so if we look at the 3.61%, if we wanted to get that to zero, based on the rule of thumb, we'd have to trim $361,000.
It's a lot.
1% is about $100,000.
But I think I want to ask here, though, for the board members here, do you want to consider adding that additional expense today? Do you want more information at your November 5th?
Let's see
Board
how the
meeting?
other numbers come out.
Yeah, I think we'll get more information as you requested, whatever the other
Okay.
communities are participating in. That'll help us to come up with a number. I mean, just, otherwise we're looking at arbitrarily.
Yeah.
Right, maybe she will provide that to you, and then, like you said, at the November 5th, you could have that
Okay,
information.
we'll do that.
And I want to see that manufacturing number.
Maybe
Could-
that'll be,
Well,
but
could-
see, that
or it could be
probably
bad.
won't be, I don't remember what
need to
day
see
it
it.
came in last year. If it will be here in time for November 5th, they're very non-committal on a date. I just know it's early November. Should be definitely before the November 19th
Yeah.
deadline, but, right, that could have an impact as well.
And not that I'm trying to take any money from anybody, but I know that we had, from our property and casualty insurance, a rebate. Is there any monies left over in that?
Well, that all would have been part of what, the 108,000 of net income
Okay,
that I'm
okay,
saying. So
Got
it's
it.
it goes to the fund balance,
okay,
so.
thank you.
So the only, so as a reminder, that November 19th will be the public hearing on the budget. And so in order to meet that deadline, I need to publish the notice the week of the 29th. So the only action that's needed tonight is this particular motion, directing me to publish the notice and make the budget publicly available for review. And again, that'll be this budget that we've discussed tonight, but there's still room to make some changes before the packet goes out for the November 19th meeting.
Do we always have the public hearing? Is that the same night we vote on it?
Yes.
We always do it on the same night?
Mhm.
Thought we did it maybe a meeting before.
There might have been, the past 7 years, there might have been one moment when we had some substantive changes come up during the public hearing evening, and we may have scheduled a special meeting a week later to finalize it. I don't remember what the situation was, but
It must have been before I was here, but
There's not a way to have public hearing, do we have another, before?
I mean, this timing, this November 19th, now, there might be a special meeting could perhaps do it, but again, the timing is such to get the tax bill,
Oh, no, I know
Stuff.
we can't go later
right,
and vote.
and
I'm
now,
just
right, we don't
I'm
have
just
enough
saying-
time at this point for a public hearing.
Having the public hearing, the meeting before we vote would be more useful. I guess we can't do it with the way the law works.
I don't think we've changed how we're doing this. This is the same process we've had for,
yeah, but I'd
Except for
agree.
maybe one,
I'd agree that it's tricky, that the challenge to doing this any sooner is that we're dealing with more and more incomplete data every week. I mean, we just
right,
got
every
EMS, for
day,
example.
there's more data coming in. Now, we probably won't get any more data till we get that manufacturing, but
I think what I would urge citizens who are really interested in the budget is to take advantage of the fact that the draft budget will be available at Village Hall for inspection. I
it's
assume it
also
can,
gonna be online
Okay.
on our website.
As of,
this week?
Yep, this week.
Okay, and,
So I just have to get all the
this is,
pieces together.
and
This is
questions.
it's in the agenda, yeah.
And questions for clarification, Renee or I can certainly help address direct contacts from residents. And I think if there's matters of policy where residents feel like they'd like to see a service added or something like that, reaching out to village board members would seem appropriate as well over the course of the next couple of weeks.
Or they could speak under public comment at our next meeting, too.
On November 5th,
Yeah,
that would seem
that's just my
appropriate.
point, that it's kind of tight for us to make decisions and then vote if we hear something significant that we want to consider. So there is some time in that regard, so that'd be good for people to know.
I mean, while not technically a public hearing meeting the state law, for us, if you care to, for us to put an item specifically on the November 5th agenda saying opportunity for additional public comment on the budget wouldn't be out of order, I don't think. It doesn't meet the public notification and true public hearing requirement, but we can post that if you want to encourage that for residents. Do you have any reason why that would?
Will we put that under just public discussion?
Sure.
Or-
Because you wouldn't be taking any action.
Right, okay. Does that meet what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think so. I just,
And then the
Be a little-
official public hearing would still be
right,
November
and if anything unanticipated came up that was pretty significant, we'd have some time to talk about it.
Yep.
So the last budget item I would like all of us to consider is in engineering and roads, we have a budget of $1 million still, correct? As we grow as a community, I feel that we need to have some sort of plan in place for how we grow that budget to meet the needs of the roads. So we're not getting behind. Because if we add 6 miles of roads and we have the same budget, we don't keep up with where we're at. So it's something that we should consider. If you can bring to us something to consider for how we can budget that out into the future.
I think we've shared that before. I mean, we have excess of, all our roads combined was
I-
excess of $20 million.
Correct, I understand that. So that's why I'm saying, as we're adding roads, though, we should put something in that we're just keeping our budget so we're in line with that moving forward. So that, we should consider something like that, in my opinion, if you guys are.
I would note that we made some predictions on those road expenses, and in that PAYGO strategy, we proposed last year that 4-year plan to increase it by, I forgot what that.
I don't remember where it was at.
And what we did is we essentially jumped the road improvement budget straight to the 4th-year projection, but then funded it with fund balance up to that. So we're still, like I said, I think it's good to check the numbers, Kevin, and we should, but we're actually on our way to meeting that within our PAYGO strategy. But certainly worth double checking to make sure we're on target.
Okay.
And also something that could be part of that capital planning project to look out even further on what we think the needs are, too.
Sounds good. All right, so it sounds like we need a motion to be made.
I would move that staff publish the notices required by state statute, et cetera, et cetera.
I got that.
Okay, you got that?
Yeah.
So a motion by Susan Springman,
Second.
second by Bill Random. His hand is up too, which is perfect. Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, then we have to go back to our second public hearing item, which is to discuss and take action on proposed zoning code amendments related to building height standards. Thank you, staff, for coming tonight, by the way. Discuss and take action on proposed zoning code amendments related to building height standards, lot area standards, and setbacks from more restrictive districts. Who's introducing? Brian or
I
Kevin?
am.
Brian.
So this is a process that we actually started back in April. We've had 3 different meetings at the Plan Commission, April 9th, August 13th, and September 10th. We've also had 2 open houses on April 9th and April 23rd that got at these different changes that ultimately led to this document that is before the village board tonight. So there's a lot of information in your packet. Pages 56 to 59 of the packet is the ordinance itself. And there's 10 separate sections, and it essentially deals with 3 issues. The first 8 sections of the ordinance address changes to our zoning code that allow, right now, under the current zoning code, in the R5 multifamily district, the O3 administrative office district, C1 general commercial district, I1 light industrial, and I2 general industrial, you can already have, by conditional use permit, heights of buildings that exceed the 45-foot height limit in each one of those districts. But there's no standards that identify, well, if you're going to be over 45 feet by conditional use permit, what's going to happen? So if you recall, back in the spring, for the C1D district, we adopted standards that address buildings that are higher than 45 feet. The first 8 sections of this proposed amendment all deal with that same issue for those different 5 districts. And for the R5 district, the O3 district, and the C1 district, staff is proposing the same standards in those 3 districts that we have for the C1D district. So any building that would be over 45 feet in height, first of all, would be capped at 55. You couldn't go higher than that. And then there's 3 other sections, or 3 other standards that are identified that kind of limit what can be above 45 feet in height. And the reason, well, I guess there's kind of 2 reasons why we've pursued these different zoning changes. One is we made the changes for the C1D, and at a staff level, we thought it would be appropriate to have similar changes elsewhere in the code. The other is, late in 2017, there was a change in the law. And the change in the law generally, and this isn't specific, this is general, says, look, if you're going to issue a conditional use permit as a municipality, whatever the conditions that you place on it have to be reasonable. And examples would be whenever we do a drive-through, we have a conditional use permit. Whenever we have outdoor drinking areas, we have conditional use permits. And I would tell you that the village, I think, has a practice of having some objective standards that it applies to its conditional use permits. That's what the law it requires, the change in the law. It says, look, if you're going to allow conditional uses, when you grant them, and if you're going to impose standards, you need them to be as measurable or as objective as possible. That's our goal with these different standards for the height, because right now we don't have anything in the code on these. We want to introduce these standards. Now, there's 5 different districts that we're dealing with. 3 of them, R5, O3, and C1, we're proposing the same standards that we have for the C1D district. For the industrial district, we didn't necessarily think that we needed that many restrictions for buildings that are over 45 feet in those particular zoning districts. So we've actually taken out 2 of those standards. And so for the industrial districts, it's just, it's still capped at 55 feet. And then it talks about all parts of the building that are above 45 feet in height shall be set back a minimum of 30 feet from any roadway. And so I think the process I think you want to use here, Chris, is we're going to introduce these changes, then you're going to have the public hearing, and then we'll be able to answer any questions. That's essentially a summary of the changes regarding the building height restrictions and what we have in our code. The other thing I would mention is within your packet, this is something that the Plan Commission had requested. Starting on page 72 through page 78 is actually a red line version of all these code changes. So it shows, the crossed out language is what's in the code right now, and the underlined language is all the new stuff. That's sections 1 through 8 of the ordinance chain. Section 9 deals with language that's already in our code. And this is specific to the C1D zoning district. We already have this lot area requirement. What village staff is proposing and what the Plan Commission recommended approval of is to change this to this dwelling unit density concept. And what it gets at is, for the C1D district, there are certain requirements that a project may have. And the easiest example is the one that we walked through with Hovde. With Hovde, they have a parent parcel, in other words, where the building is going to be. But to serve that parent parcel, they also need stormwater and they needed parking. And what happened is they're using a stormwater area right across the extension of Cross Street. That's going to be where their stormwater is. And then they're paying 50% for the library extension parking lot. And both of those essentially, the stormwater is definitely serving their project. They always took the position that they didn't need the additional parking. Todd and Kevin were actually able to negotiate a pretty nice agreement that says you're going to pay 50% for this parking lot, and so they will also get service if need be for their project. One of the things that you run into in a downtown district where your parcels are already defined is the parcels can't get any bigger. Versus, let's say, out in Kilkenny, when the developer needs to develop a parcel in Kilkenny, if it needs a lot a little bit bigger because it needs stormwater there, well, then they just get a certified survey map and they make the lot a little bit bigger. There are some necessary constraints that deal with downtown development that are in this lot area code standard that exists right now. What we're proposing is some changes. And really what it would do is it would allow for improvements that are necessary for a project, if they could be located within 500 feet of that parent project, of the parent parcel, and again, this is they may be allowed. We're not binding ourselves to do this, we're just saying we're gonna have the discretion to do it. But if there are parcels that are within 500 feet of the parent parcel where the property owner could put, let's say, parking or stormwater, there's the potential to allow for that to happen. Now, one of the things that came up at the Plan Commission level was we want to make sure that if that happens, there needs to be an agreement in place where the village is a beneficiary to make sure that those stormwater or parking can still exist, and then we would we'd place a deed restriction that would be recorded on property to make sure that that could occur in the future. So that's numbered in paragraph 9. The last one is what I would say really the newest provision. And so if you look at page 59 of the document, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to call your attention to page 79, because we had a suggestion come up as part of the Plan Commission recommendation. And then we also had some public comments since the Plan Commission meeting. People were saying that the language that we've proposed is a little bit complicated, or wait, what about this particular issue? And so what this is getting at is we already have language in our code that says if we have a property that's in one zoning district and it abuts other property that's in another zoning district that's a different one, we're going to figure out a way to apply, and if the second district has more restrictive setback requirements, then those more restrictive setback requirements would be applicable to the lot that is adjacent to it. So that's already in the code right now. As we were going through the HUVD process, I think it was Dr. Ranum who mentioned, hey, what about issues related to height? What if we have a building that's going to be put in one zoning district that has height restrictions that are different to the adjacent district? Is there a way that we can try to mold them together to make everything work together a little bit better? And so as a staff, we went through, and if you look up at the screen right now, that is subsection 2. So subsection D1 is already in the code right now. What we've done is we've tried to take a crack at putting together a D2 to get at this height issue. And this language that is on page 79 of your packet is a little bit different than the language that was in the initial proposal, because we've thought of 2 ways to potentially improve this. One is to make clear that if I'm in one district and I'm adjacent to another district, and so the height of my building is going to be impacted by the adjacent district, that I can't use the conditional use permit process to go over 45 feet. The height of my building is going to be set at 45 feet. We believe that that was part of the discussion that the Plan Commission had, and so we've updated the ordinance to address that. The second part of this, I'm actually going to put Jason on the spot right here, because he was the one, I think, that noticed this and kind of came up with what we believe is another improvement to the relationship between the building in the more restrictive district and how it relates to the height restrictions in the less restrictive district.
Sure. So Jason Valerius, MSA. The prior version of this had said that any height above that limit set by the adjacent more restricted district. So typically we're talking about a 35-foot limit in a residential district, and then, for example, a 45 limit in a 45-foot limit in a C1D next to it. And what we said was, well, any height above 35, in effect, needs to be set back. Each additional foot in height needs to be set back an additional foot from the property line or from the setback, either one. And the concern that we had, and a question, this kind of related to a question that came up in public comment, but the concern was that someone designing or building a new building would just take the whole building and push the whole building back further, and then the whole building would go up the full 45. And that wasn't really our intent. Our intent was that additional height above the 35 would just that height be stepped back, so that when you're in the street, you wouldn't have such a dramatic full building height face that you'd be looking at. The additional height would be stepped back. And so the proposed change that you're seeing would indicate that it is the additional height that has to be stepped back from the building, the main building facade. So the point of reference is not the property line or the setback, it is the main building facade. So wherever that main building facade is, additional height above, as our example, 35 feet, has to be set back, stepped back foot for foot from that location, from the building facade.
And Jason, I just wanted to go through an example. Somebody had emailed me over the weekend and said, can you give me an example on how this would work? And so I'm working off an existing project. It's the Cannery Road project, so it's by the community center. And this is actually S1 zoning in that blue, but it's a different zoning classification. The oranges that are R3D. Well, in the R3D, the height requirement, or the maximum height requirement, is 35 feet. In the S1, the height requirement is 45 feet. And some of you will remember, we didn't have these restrictions in place, or on the books in the ordinance. We certainly didn't have them back then, and we don't have them yet until you tell us to move forward. There was a lot of discussion at the Plan Commission level about how this portion of the Cannery Road, this back portion that abuts up near the residential, how that would fit in with the neighborhood. Well, the Plan Commission indicated at that time, actually, as a condition of approval, required them to step down the building. So the majority of the building is at a 3-story, and that's this section of the property. The other, the section that's abuts next to the residential is actually only a 2-story building. And if I go around the corner, you'll see the residential and how this residential lot line is shared between the Cannery Road project. And I thought in that case, the Plan Commission used, I thought, pretty good judgment in requiring them to step it down to make sure there was a compatibility, even though it wasn't a requirement. The only other thing I would add is, and we are putting more restrictions on this property in terms of what would be allowed now. Right now, I think the building was orientated well, but there's a 30-foot setback at this spot of the roadway, just the very tip of this building. That's at 30 feet, and while this proposed building, or this building, the Cannery Road building, is actually 38 feet 7 inches. So under this new ordinance, the Cannery Road project would have had to been stepped back another 3.5 feet from where it is now, or they would have had to reconfigure this corner of the building to get it back, the 38 feet to 7 inches. And I thought that was helpful in trying to understand on what's going on here.
So I think from staff's point of view, and also from the Plan Commission's recommendation, what we're recommending would be approval of the ordinance changes 1 through 10. Although we would substitute the language on page 79, which is subsection 10, for what is on page 59 of the document. Because not all of these things were discussed at the Plan Commission level, that's why we didn't insert it into the actual ordinance right now, but are rather identifying it and had the separate page. The other thing I'll tell you is our recommendation is this. You do have the ability, there's 10 different sections. You don't have to, you can approve some of it and not approve other of it. That's not our recommendation, but I do want to make you aware of the fact that you do have that ability. You don't have to approve all 10. You can kind of decide what you want to do. I would tell you that, the first 8 are all kind of one set, one issue, then the 9th is the second issue, and the 10th is the third issue.
Okay. Then we're going to open our public hearing. 8 o'clock on the nose. And
Do you want the written ones first, or do you want
sure.
the written ones?
You want to read? You can read them.
Julie and Bruce Kaufman, 908 Turnberry Drive, opposed to the ordinance changes. Elaine Laufenberg, 301 West Main Street. I am against the 65-foot height for buildings on Main Street. Sam Kaufman, please add a stepped roof line requirement, Village Crossing, Cannery Road, cottages on Main, have them, and they provide a good transition into residential, and the scale is better for Main Street. Carrie Arneson, 923 Lexington Way. Below are a few comments about the density ordinance changes. First, big picture, does the village currently track density or have data on how density currently impacts our community in terms of traffic, parking, street safety, etc.? It would be very helpful to have that information before making changes that will allow for greater density. I worry about potentially long-term negative impacts on our community that future boards will have to somehow resolve. Second, in a practical sense, the proposed language is inconsistent with the current ordinance for off-lot parking. For example, the existing code specifies that off-lots must be in possession of the principal lot owner by deed. It is not clear if what is proposed here will be updated in that ordinance accordingly, or if each will be referred to under different circumstances. It seems that should be clarified before voting on it. Third, what is the point of reference for determining if a parcel is within 500 feet of the principal lot? Is it the center of the lot, perpendicular from all sides, edges, distance from the principal's entrance? Depending on the point of reference, the resultant lot area calculations could be significantly different, especially with larger lots. Point of reference would make it clear for all parties involved, including developers. Fourth, a maximum density was inherent in the old ordinance. Now the maximum density allowed or understanding of what is possible is not clear. Please consider adding a maximum density clause. This could be done in a number of ways, but please consider capping it in a way that is relative to the size of the principal lot. For reference, Hovde's lot area calculation per dwelling unit, if using only the principal lot area, is 940 square feet. Is it the intent of the village to allow for buildings with even greater density on Main Street? A limit seems prudent. And the last one is Ann Lewandowski, 103 West 3rd Street. Proposed zoning changes 2 and 3 as written support changing the height in the industrial park. I support changing the height in the industrial park as it will support the needs of the business community in appropriate location and hopefully attract good paying jobs to our village. Item number 2, density. Please amend the density standard to include that the improvements must be within the same zoning district. Cross zoning districts undermines the point of separating zoning districts, and we should avoid incentivizing it. Item number 3, height transitions between districts. A 70-foot or more setback is huge. The language of this ordinance is poorly written. Don't pass this into law, please. I don't think we want 70-foot street setback requirements on Main Street, even for properties that abut lower use districts. Given what I have heard from developers over the past 9 months, I don't think that will foster good growth or promote responsible infill development. Please throw this out and start again. I agree heights should be transitioned from areas, but I do not think this is the right way to do it. We have excellent examples within our village of reasonable transitions, and they have stepped roofs. Please use this as the requirement rather than setbacks. I can provide a simple, reasonable formula that would quantify this upon request. I am sorry for not being able to attend tonight. Thank you for reading my comment. Jerry Ashmore, 114 South Street.
I want to talk about the building height standards. One of the things that was mentioned at the plan commission meeting was that zoning ordinances are complicated, and they're only as complicated as you make them, and you can certainly work to make them less complicated. So we have a standards of 45 feet for a lot of these districts, and conditional uses that allow more than 45 feet, although not actually in the C1 district. There's no language that allows anything higher than 45 feet. There's this odd line in conditional uses in the C1 district that allows office buildings over 35 feet. It doesn't make sense for 2 reasons. First of all, among the allowed uses, the generic term office buildings doesn't show up. And secondly, there's nothing limited to 35 feet, so there's no reason to say that office buildings over 45 feet are a conditional use. It looks to me like that line is probably an orphan from some imperfect readjustment of ordinances sometime in the past. Nothing in the building height requirements mention that you can go above 45 feet with conditional use, which is mentioned specifically in other zoning districts. we have this problem that we allow over 45 feet in some districts. Potentially, somebody could come in and propose a 100-foot building. We don't have a reason to disallow that because we don't have specific standards. That's a problem that needs to be solved. What I would term the complicated fix is what is presented to you of allowing from 45 to 55 feet with this restriction and that requirement and such. The easy fix is to simply take out the conditional uses allowing anything over 45 feet. 45 feet is really quite tall. That's plenty enough for downtown C1D district. It's plenty enough for C1D. It's plenty enough for most of these districts. I agree with Ann Lewandowski or whoever it was that said that in the industrial park, perhaps up to 55 feet would be good. There could be industrial buildings out on Moravian Valley Road or something that wouldn't impact anybody by their size, but could be conducive to business in the business park or industrial park. But what will be a much easier fix for the building height standard is to just go to 45 feet. The one hitch in this is that in the downtown C1D district, we do have a building that's been approved, the Hovde building, to go over 45 feet for their party on the roof part of the building. Not built yet, but has been approved. If you want to go ahead and grandfather that in, and so since it has been approved and you don't want to tell somebody after they've started construction that they can't do what you said they could, that seemed perfectly logical, but you could simply make it a hard 45 limit in anything but the industrial zoning districts. And you could always change it at a later date if somebody comes up with some project that is so fabulous that has to be over 45 feet. You could go back to adding in conditional uses because, as was mentioned at the Plan Commission meeting, you're not locked in anything. You can always change stuff at a future date. So I would recommend not making the changes with the 45 to 55 convoluted language. Simply take out the conditional use for over 45 feet and cap everything at 45. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Ellen Kearney, 317 West Main Street.
Well, some of my questions and concerns have been answered, but I was gonna still raise them because there has been so much confusion. People come up and say, well, what is the limit? Is it limits in stories? Is it limits in height? And so what does the height limit, how does that come across in terms of stories? Because people are concerned that the variances granted to the 3-story Hovde building are becoming the norm, and that people are going to react to that. And do we still have a 3-story standard, or is it now a 4-story as proposed by T-Wall? And what's the height in feet standard, and how does that equate to stories? And there's lots of confusion over setbacks. And if you're looking at a building from the front at the street level, you can't see anything above the roof line. But give yourself some perspective coming down Main Street, you can see all of that stuff. So standing in front of the building doesn't seem to be a good standard. And from down the street, all extra straight height things like mechanic structure or penthouses are very visible. I've been looking at all the tall buildings being built along University Avenue going in on the west side. And you see all sorts of add-ons on the roof. And I call it skyline clutter. And I don't think we should have that in Waunakee. And I think that we should consider the lay of the land in future projects. Something constructed on top of a hill will loom larger than something in a valley. Also, the massive building and its footprint on the lot or the block where it is constructed should be considered. A big building on a small lot can be overwhelming. Should there be different standards for new buildings being added in older established districts and infill, or building larger structures can be planned for in new development? So you address some of these things, but these are the issues that people on the street are raising.
Thank you.
Mary Heinbecker, 306 West 3rd Street.
I have a concern with the 55-foot and no story limit. With a 55-foot building, you could get to 5 stories, even if it's on a commercial lot, with allowing still 15 feet for the bottom floor. If somebody did 8-foot ceilings, they can still get up to 5 stories at 55 feet. So I think that there should be a foot limit as well as a story limit in the districts. I'm fine with higher, taller buildings out in the industrial park. I think that there's room for them, appropriate for business districts, but not in the C1D. Thanks.
Thank you.
Linda Ashmore, 114 South Street.
I wanted to take a look at this in relation to the history, because one of the things I keep hearing is Waunakee is a great place to live, which it is. That's why we're all here. The Planning Commission in the past set limits, very clear limits, 45 feet. And the way conditional use permits worked up until this change to the state law in 2017 was that somebody wanted to do something over the 45 feet, if it was allowed in these other districts, not the commercial districts, then they could come in and say, you know, I have X proposal and I'd like to do this, and the Plan Commission could say, well, does that make sense or not? With the state law change, the village attorney is correct, that basically if they come in and they say, I want to do a CUP and you allow it, then they would be granted that CUP because it's a shell kind of thing, which is my understanding of why you're putting limits on. I agree with my husband. I think 45 feet is very clear, especially the commercial districts, because the C1D, that was one of the points that was made when the C1D district was changed to allow the 55-foot for Hovde, was that the regular commercial district did not have conditional use permit language in it. It did not have that extra language. So the village had to amend the ordinance to allow for the conditional use permit and then have another meeting to pass that they would allow the conditional use permit. So I'd really like to see us just stick to the 45 feet. I agree industrial can be higher, that makes sense. One of the things though to really consider, because I didn't know that until I came to one of these other meetings, is that Trinity has a development next to industrial. And so, you know, he might have a little bit more input about how much of a setback that's going to be, because it might be hard to sell residential lots when you're next to 55-foot high, you know, buildings. Just something to think about. As far as the parking lots, I really want to see, as has been mentioned before, that if they're going to have the C1D parking lot changed, then the parking lot has to be in C1D. It shouldn't be going into a residential district or another district. Like the library parking lot is not in a residential district, but is not in C1D for the library. So the Hovde lot is being used by, the library lot is being used by Hovde, so that's what I'm talking about with the C1D. So I'd like to see that be clarified, that if you're going to have a parking lot where you say that they may do this, then it has to be in the same district that they're allowing it for. And for the last thing, I think that was a good change, that we listened at the Plan Commission, the step back requirement, just seeing the changes here, that does make sense, that you probably have a better take on the height not being so abrupt. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
That's it.
Okay, so then anybody else? I don't want to not give somebody the opportunity. Okay, then I'm going to close the public hearing. I'll probably defer, there are some comments and questions from people in there, if you guys could maybe provide some feedback on those.
So, let me start with, we've heard the comments regarding number 9, which is the dwelling unit density. And we heard comments about the fact, at the Plan Commission level, we've heard comments now, and I think we've gotten some written comments, the concerns about potentially bleeding into residential. And I think that there should be a distinction made between if you have, again, we're only talking about the C1D district, but if you have C1D project that wants to put parking that's within 500 feet in a district other than residential, for example, institutional, or because I believe that, for example, where the Hovde parking is going, that's zoned institutional. It's not residential. And so if the idea is, yes, we have a concern with making sure that this doesn't get into a residential neighborhood, but if it's an other zone, if it's a district that is not residentially zoned, we wouldn't have a concern if the parking was in that district. One of the things that you could do is you could add language. So now I'm at the top of page 59 of your packet. So this is Section 9 of the ordinance, the proposed change to 133-491 sub 4, you could add a sentence that says, notwithstanding the preceding sentences, the adjacent parcel or parcels shall not be located in a residential zoning district. And so the reference there to adjacent or adjacent parcels is back to what's earlier in the code, where we have the parent parcel, which is where the building is, and then we have the potential adjacent parcels where you could either have stormwater parking or some other improvement that's related. If you have a concern about that, you just don't want it to go into a residential district. If it goes into a different district, like institutional, that's not a problem, but the residential, that's the way I think to deal with that issue, is add that sentence. The other comments I wanted to make was, I do agree that back when we started talking about C1D, we were talking about a commercial district. And I do think that there was language that was in there that did not get modified, because the language in the C1 district, where it said you could have a conditional use permit for an office building over 35 feet, didn't make sense, because buildings themselves could already be up to 45 feet. And so what I said way back in the spring, and what I believe now is, a long time ago, the limitation on heights in the C1 district, the commercial district, was 35 feet. And to go have a building over 35 feet, you had to have a conditional use permit. At some point in time, we raised the height for buildings in the C1 district to 45, but we didn't change the language that said you could have to go over that height restriction, you would have to have a conditional use permit. The last thing I will say is, I know the reasonable opinions have been identified, where basically the idea is, don't allow heights that go over 45 feet by conditional use permit. I don't recommend doing that. I don't recommend having a hard cap at 45 feet. I do recommend the changes are here that gives you a little bit of flexibility to go over the 45 feet. Now, the reason why we're putting that hard cap in the language that we propose now is, in these districts, you could have a building that could go up to 65 feet. There isn't anything within our code right now that would prevent that. That's one of the reasons why we've identified the 55-foot height, the cap. It's also part of the discussion that came up back at I believe at the April 9th Plan Commission meeting, and as part of the open meeting processes, is if you're going to do this, have a cap. I would just suggest to you that a cap at 45 feet, where there's nothing that can go, when that's permitted, nothing can go over that as part of the conditional use. I wouldn't recommend do that. I know that Waunakee is unique. Every community is unique. My experience is every community allows property owners to exceed a height restriction by a conditional use permit process. I think that's a standard practice, and that's what the village has right now, and I suggest that you keep it, but you just put some other standards in place, and that's what's proposed here.
So, I apologize, what's the advantage to the extra height? I mean,
It gives the village flexibility on projects. So that if somebody comes to you and says, I want to do this particular project, and you as a community think, yeah, that looks good, if you have that 45-foot cap, but all of a sudden, the project itself that's being proposed that you think is good goes over that 45 feet, it gives you the flexibility to do it.
But not above 55.
But not above, and quite frankly.
And restrictions on it.
Yeah.
Like as the current ordinance requires, only 25% of it can be above the 45 feet, and it's gotta be an ancillary use. It can't be the permitted use that's under the 45 feet. So I think from a policy standpoint, is the Hovde project with its, accessory structure on top of it, which has some minimal visual impacts. From a policy standpoint, if you think that's good policy, we're trying to duplicate those types of standards in the other ordinances, or the other parts of the ordinances.
yeah, I just sort of wish it was visualizable already. That's my thing. I wish I could see what it was. Is there an example? That's an easy to find example that's similar to Hovde for me, or is there? I'm just thinking on
That hits that difference between 45 and 55. I couldn't put my finger on it.
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to think, visualize it. I think there's I feel the concern. The difference is when are we not going to do it? Is there a way to disincentivize it, or is there?
I think the standards that we've identified act for certain projects as a disincentive. When you look at So if you look at, so here are the 4 standards that would for a C1 district, that would apply for a building that would be over 45 feet. It's capped at 55 feet. All parts of the building that are above 45 feet in height shall be set back a minimum of 30 feet from any road right-of-way. The total surface square footage of the parts of the building that is above 45 feet cannot exceed 25% of the total square footage of the first floor of the building. The parts of the building that are above 45 feet in height shall be used only for purposes that are accessory to the primary use of the building. So especially when you look at those last 3 standards, they are really limiting what's going to be allowed over that 45-foot height that's already in existence. So I think that those standards in and of themselves, we haven't heard it yet. I shouldn't say that. We have heard it. It's been a while since we've heard it, but there was one party that was arguing that you shouldn't have those standards because they effectively act as too much of a disincentive. Now, village staff disagreed with the party that was making those statements, but there is an argument that says these 3 standards are so restrictive that they're too restrictive. But as a staff, we don't believe that's true. We believe that they're appropriate.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
How are mechanicals dealt with? Relative-
Mechanicals, there's already language in the existing zoning code that allows for the plan commission to approve mechanicals that go above 45 feet. As part of that process, in all likelihood, you'd have some type of screening, but that language is already in the zoning code.
We require screening on mechanicals on roofs, don't we? New buildings? We don't, we should.
Typically, almost all the projects require some screening, especially if they're going to be visible. It depends on the visibility from the street.
Well.
But if it's visible, yes, it's going to
from
require
where,
screening.
Yeah.
Right.
That would be something I'd like to see, screening on mechanicals on the roof. And mechanicals need to go on the roof nowadays because of water. There's gonna be a huge push to move all mechanicals out of lower levels of buildings because of the flooding situation, because the whole building goes down. Even parking under buildings has become a problem, but it's easier to replace a car than it is your mechanical units. I just was in a meeting where that was talked about, and I hadn't thought about it, but it is a big, big issue nowadays. So 25%, of a floor area, that could be pretty small too. Plus you'd have to locate it where the elevator can get to it, which means you're then constrained to putting your elevator in the middle, probably the middle of your building, that can create problems too, because you need the public to get the elevator from a security standpoint. It may not even work, but, that's what we're proposing. I'm just saying it may not work from a construction standpoint and an access standpoint. You can disagree with me, but I was just thinking about
I'm not disagreeing with you. I think that your comment demonstrates, though, that these standards
It's
are pretty restrictive.
Yeah, that's restrictive. They'll probably dissuade it. And the other issue on floors versus stories, no one's gonna build an 8-foot floor because you wouldn't be able to rent it. It's just somebody's 6 foot and you got 2 feet above you. You got mechanicals up in all your ceilings. Nowadays, they just don't build those kind of floor to ceiling heights anymore. It's just not done. The market doesn't want it. They want, a higher ceiling. I think height, to me, is more important. I don't care how many floors. I just know nobody's gonna put an 8-foot floor to ceiling in for apartments or for commercial, either of those. It's just not marketable. Think how tall 8 feet is.
For what it's worth, I believe other municipal ordinances have restrictions based on height and not by stories, similar
Yeah,
to what
plus
we
you have to
already
put
have in our zoning
sprinklers.
code.
You have to put sprinklers in all new multifamily, and those would be hanging down where you could grab them and,
Bill?
Nothing right now.
Aaron?
It seems more restrictive to me, but I'm percolating my thoughts.
They can't put the mechanicals on, I apologize for that, this is probably, mechanicals couldn't be on the highest piece there then? Would they be allowed on the 55-foot section?
Are they gonna be can they be above 45
it
feet?
can be between 45 and 55.
Right, but would they
Not
be
now.
placed on the
What do you-
highest point.
I think what you're asking is the 25% that's at 55 feet, could they
Yeah.
put the mechanicals on top of that? Is
Or
that what you're
outside of
asking?
that.
That's exactly.
So in other words, could the mechanicals be above the 55 feet? They could now. I think based on this ordinance change, that's not something that's gonna happen. No. Because we're capping it, the height of the building shall not exceed 55 feet.
Including the mechanicals.
But now they could go up higher.
Would you need to change the
The
wording
plan
in here?
commission has some discretion, and that's, as the example that I gave you on the Cannery Row, we didn't have restrictions in place. They could have built a three-story building. That would have been allowed by the code. I think you do have to have some faith in your plan commission that if there's gonna be mechanicals, that you're relying on Jason and Ed and others to make sure that there's gonna be proper screening, and that they're not gonna be, it wouldn't make any sense to put it on top of a 55, unless maybe it was just a one-unit thing for that particular building. But it wouldn't make any sense from, an aesthetic standpoint to try and put all those up on 25. Yeah, could it technically be allowed? I suspect that it could, but the plan commission would never be in a position to want to approve that.
And you don't want it on the ground because it's a noise issue.
Joe, any comments?
I guess my only thought on this is, we're dealing with a couple of different scenarios here, so I think it would be nice if we could vote on them separately. I don't know if that's an option.
I can make that change, right? If we want.
Well, I guess it would be.
Would you vote 10 different times, or would
I
you vote-
wouldn't, well, I guess that would be the question I would pose. Is it that you want to vote on the conditional use permit size height and then the lot density issue, and then the last one relating to the discussion that Jason and Kevin led? That's one. In theory, you could break each of the CUP and the heights separately if you wanted to, but I don't know if that was what you're getting at.
No, I was thinking 3 separate
Yeah.
votes.
And so, well.
You're saying the first 8, 9, and 10?
First 8, 9, and 10.
Okay, okay.
And I guess I don't want to jump the gun. If you guys are there, then I can get into that, unless you want to have discussion. Or I guess one way to approach it is, okay, we have the updated section 10 that's on page 79. Is that something that you guys want to discuss? And if not, do you want to vote on approving that first? There hasn't been much discussion on that one.
Can I ask another question too? My computer died.
There you go.
So I have to look at somebody else's. I've lost the whole zoning thing. I'm really sympathetic to the issue of, if you put your parking somewhere else, we did deed restrict it, right? So it's forever, so somebody.
Correct.
But I don't want it in a residential neighborhood.
And
either.
so that would be the additional sentence that we talked about for that section 9.
Or the stormwater. I think it
Yeah,
needs to
that's
stay out of
simple,
a
right.
neighborhood.
Out of residential.
Yeah.
Out of residence.
So in that scenario, always using examples, would that have meant when St. John's put their parking lot in and we designed it to accommodate parking in our downtown? Because St. John's parking lot is located next to residential, would this have been?
It's institutional, so it could have been a lot, it's non-residential.
St. John's zone's institutional, so if you were to, let's assume for a second, for argument's sake, that you were to approve the section 9 with the additional sentence that I read, notwithstanding the preceding sentences, the adjacent parcel or parcels shall not be located in a residential zoning district. Because the church is in an institutional zoning district, that last sentence wouldn't impact the ability to use the St. John's parking lot for downtown businesses. You could use it.
Or do you mean,
But
would
my
it have
point-
been able to be made?
My point is that those were residences before it became a parking lot.
But they rezoned the parking lot and the houses to institutional as part of the project, so then it would have been allowed.
Okay. So, listening to several of your comments, language is convoluted. So that, we're counting on you to make sure this is well-written as our attorney and staff, to make sure. I look at this, it's 45 feet for your main building. Anything above that has to be 25% of the building footprint.
Setback.
And setback.
I don't think that, I don't.
Is that basically the premise of
Yes.
what
I
the
don't
wording is
think
saying?
that the
I'm just trying to
standards-
find where you're saying it's convoluted. I'm not trying to be negative on it, I'm just saying, to me, it seems real simple, but
I think the one, I would say this, I believe that sections 1 through 9 are pretty straightforward. We, as a staff, we believe we heard a good comment from Dr. Ranum as part of the Hovde project. We're wrestling with, we've done a lot of drafts. Now, if you're looking at page 79 of the, when you look at that section D2, where now we are, we have a section of our code, 133-12D, section 1, that already exists. So when you're looking at page 79, D1 is already in the code. We heard some comments about the idea of trying to basically have buildings that are adjacent to a more restrictive district. Let's figure out a way to make the heights match up between the more restrictive district and the less restrictive district. We've tried to put together what we think is understandable language in that section 2, and in particular section 2B. I think the improvements that Jason have made it more clear. I do think that they address some of the comments that have been made. Is that one a little bit more difficult to follow than the sections 1 through, the standards in section 1 through 8? I think I'd have to acknowledge that. But I do think that, we have an understanding of what 2B means, in particular based on the updates that Jason has made. And is it somewhat complicated? Yes. Is it clear enough for the Plan Commission and village staff and to communicate to developers and for developers to have to follow? I definitely think it is.
So my next question are we being overly restrictive compared to other places? I want to maintain standards in our downtown. I do also want to make it that people can, if they want to redevelop and there's areas that should be redeveloped, that they have an opportunity to do it from a financial standpoint, in coming in to do that. So that's where I'm coming at right now. Are we making this too restrictive? Is it kind of in the middle? Are we too far one way is what I'm getting at.
Well, the only example a guy can give is Hovde. And we applied, so if you look at the standards that we're proposing for R5, O3, and C1, those are the same standards for Hovde. It looks to me from, I'm not a planner and I'm not an engineer, it looks to me like they're gonna be putting in a pretty good project. And I think the village board agreed with that because it approved the development agreement and approved the project. I do believe that the standards are pretty restrictive, but a good project like Hovde was able to move forward notwithstanding those restrictions. And so that may be an example to say that we've hit kind of the happy medium. But to Dr. Durano's point at the beginning, I mean, when you talk about people saying we should have a 45-foot cap, and then you're talking about the way we've drafted this, and we do allow it to go up to 55 feet, that 10-foot, what you can put in those 10 feet is pretty restrictive. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
Well, it's kind of where I'm going. I'm thinking if I'm the developer, what things would I want to put up in that 25%? One is what Hovde proposed, which is a room. Maybe a rooftop pool? I'm just trying to think of the things that would go up there within that space that would make sense.
Community room for people.
Yeah, that's what Hovde basically did. So I'm just trying to think what other amenities would go there from a developer standpoint, why they're gonna want that. I also look at it from their perspective of they wanna rent what they have. They wanna bring this to the consumer who wants these things. And that's kind of what I'm weighing right now with going over the 45 for that 10-foot and what that's going to be and what that means to the developer. There has to be a reason that they want it, to be up there. And that's for their residents who are potentially moving in there as an amenity to them.
That's because most projects have them now, so you're competing.
Correct. So it's a common thing that's happening in many communities, not just Waunakee potentially here, but others. So I like the language changes that have been made. I think Jason's change with the next door housing and how we're gonna set that back and how we're gonna interpret that there's no room for error, is very clear. So those are my comments at this point. to Joe's point, he would like, it sounds like you'd like to vote on the different things,
Separately.
3 separate votes.
I would echo the comments you were just making about that additional 10 feet. That's exactly where I'm feeling too, you know. Certainly, we could make it 45 feet and be done. We could make it 55 feet and be done. But I think there's some valid reasons to have that flexibility in there yet with the restrictions that are put on it. And yeah, it probably does deter that a little bit. I'm okay with that.
Can I just ask, do you think, I mean, that if we do that, we can resist if somebody says we're just putting 55 feet up? Do we have enough legal, is the ordinance strong enough to hold?
So in other words, I guess if we don't make these changes.
Which I understand,
Yeah.
yeah.
If we make these changes and somebody comes in and they say, I have a project and ultimately I want it to be 60 feet tall, it's gonna be a no. You can't go above 55 feet. We have legal standards that are in our code right now that we've adopted as part of the conditional use permit process. They're measurable, they're objective. You violate them, you can't go higher. If we don't adopt these ordinances and somebody walks in and they want to put a 60-foot building in a district that allows conditional use above 45 feet, I'm not going to, would we have some measurable, is there a way that we could basically reject that? There probably is, but the question is going to be, what's the basis for saying 60 feet's too high when it can be above 45 feet as a part of conditional use permit? And, you know, if you deny it, then they want to challenge it, you got to defend it. And so through the process of like a site plan or things of that nature, when they come up with the project, we would have to identify objective reasons as to why we don't want it to be as high as 60 feet. Could it be done? Yes. Is it cleaner if you have the standard in place under the new law? Without question, it's cleaner if you were to adopt the new standards.
What I mean is legally, could somebody come and say, hey, we see it could be 25%. Are they gonna be able to challenge that? I mean, are they gonna be able to say, well, if it's 25%, why not 50%?
I don't think they're gonna be able to, because it's a standard that's in our code, and that's an argument that people have tried, I mean, not just here,
That's
but
wondering
in
if it's been
number, yeah,
argued,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's not, some people would, when they challenge you, they're gonna say that's an arbitrary number, and it's not an arbitrary number. We've went through a process and we've come up for reasons as to why we think that percentage is appropriate, and so I do believe it would withstand scrutiny.
I'll come back to you, Aaron. Do you have any comments now? Are you are still percolating? Okay, Phil?
Just one, I'm pretty sure I understand this. We cap the height at 45. We've got a party room that takes it up to 55, and inside that party room area, somewhere set back, we have the cooling units and et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if they would be in that room, but they would be on that top floor, properly screened.
Properly screened. And there wouldn't be a cooling unit or et cetera, or an elevator tower that got people to the 55 feet that would extend above that.
Well, that seems to, I mean, that's, to me,
wouldn't
that's,
be.
if the village board's position is, it's 55, and the existing language that is in the code right now that allows for penthouses or for, elevator units or for mechanicals to go above that, you don't want that to apply, then I think we would have to make that more clear here. I mean, Kevin made the point of, you know, one argument to say, let's not put that language in there is to have a little bit of faith in the plan commission. You as the village board have the ability to say, when we say it doesn't go over 55, that means nothing goes over 55, including there's a section in the code right now where we have a laundry list. Now, here's one question for you though. Okay, we talk about mechanicals, we talk about elevator penthouses. What about flagpoles? What about antennas? Like, you know, and I'm really kind of going on the rabbit hole here, but the law changes within the last 5 years have really taken away our ability to restrict where cell towers go in our community. At some point in time, and I don't know when it's going to happen, but at some point in time, these cell towers are going to become much smaller. And is it going to make sense to have, you know, I mean, are they going to be put on roofs? And they're not going to be 50 feet tall, they're going to be 7 feet tall, but because they get to be on top of a 55-foot, The question I have then is, if you're gonna cap it at 55, is it literally capped at everything? Or are there certain things, like a flagpole, for example, would you be okay if that went up to 60 feet? And to me, that's where you get into the discretionary aspect of what Kevin is talking about of, first of all, we don't have to, under the existing code right now, the section, and I can't remember the name of the section, I apologize, but there is a section that says the height restrictions in every district do not apply to certain things. In other words, they can go above that. The examples that we've had thus far are the mechanicals that go on the roof, elevator, penthouses. I know flagpoles are a part of that. Do you want to allow for the flexibility of the Plan Commission to address that and say, hey, for a flagpole, we're willing to have that go above 55 feet, some other stuff we're not, in which case you wouldn't change this language. If the thought process of the village board is no, 55 feet is 55 feet, then we'd want to put language into each of these sections that say, that's what it means, and then what I would do is I would put in language that says, and this section of the code shall not apply, and to allow it to go over 55 feet. That's a discussion point, I think.
Still nothing?
Oh, I know.
Okay. All right, so,
Hey, can I say one more thing? I mean, that's where, okay, I mean, we can talk about these things separately. It may be, and I'm going to go on what the recommendations are, it may be that you want to approve Section 10 as revised. And it may be that you're willing to approve Section 9 with that additional sentence added. It may be that you want 1 through 8 to come back, because there's lots of things that you guys have discussed on this. One is, are the restrictions too restrictive? That's one thing we've heard. The other thing is, or potentially, are they not restrictive enough? And then what about that cap at 55 feet? Is it really going to be a hard cap at 55, in which case we'd probably have to have language here? Or do you want to give the Plan Commission discretion that they're not going to allow certain things to go above 55, but other things they may be willing, like a flagpole? That's one reason to vote on it separately, but I think depending on what you do, and especially if you decide not to approve something, we're going to need to get feedback from you as to what, or do you table it, like on the 1 through 8? Do you table it because you want to have further discussions, in which case that's where the feedback to us is going to be important to see other ways that we should modify it.
Jason wanted to say something.
I was just going to clarify, and I think you got there, Brian, but there are exemptions to the height requirements, and he hit on a bunch of them, so.
Exemptions where? In our code?
In your code right now have been, so mechanicals, cooling towers, elevator towers, spires, grain elevators. I mean, it gets into some agricultural uses too. There are exemptions, flagpoles. They aren't necessarily connected. Yes, they could go higher. I would also add, though, that 55, that additional height above the 45 is a conditional use, and you still have reference in here, and you're still subject to the kind of looser requirements of your existing conditional use permit standards, which say that you don't want that conditional use to have a negative effect on the existing uses in the surrounding neighborhood. So it gets a little trickier to approve that in a way that it's going to stand up to judicial scrutiny under the new statute, but I think there's still a way to do that. So there is still language in there. Just because it says you can go to 55, that doesn't mean you get to go to 55 automatically. This is still a conditional use permit process.
And the only thing I would add to that too is, along the same what Jason's saying, those exceptions that we've been talking about, that's also, it's not, you don't have to do it. It's something that the Plan Commission has discretion to do. In other words, the Plan Commission has discretion to allow the mechanicals to go above 45 feet right now under the existing code. The Plan Commission doesn't have to require it. Now, you get into a little bit of an issue of, if you've done it for somebody else, why aren't you doing it for me? You're going to have a good reason not to, to distinguish the two. But again, that's a discretionary decision that's in the code right now.
Well, a penthouse is always gonna go above the floor it
Yeah.
surfaces. It has to, in stairwells.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
so I'm of the opinion, this is me now, that it's 55 feet, period, at that point. it doesn't matter if it's a flagpole or anything else.
Okay.
That's where I'm at, everybody. You
Yeah,
guys are gonna.
I'll be
or-
the same.
Otherwise,
your
I'm
own
referring
opinions.
it.
Otherwise, as Mr. Ashmore said, you keep putting different things, convoluted, was that the word? I think that was the word, within this. So that keeps it simple that we know it's 45, CUP up to 55, hard cap there, and it's done. And that's my opinion on this, where we go with it. But if you guys wanted to defer, delay, and ask them to go and look to see what other things we might want to include in there, you know, that's our choice as well, for 1 through 8. I'm hoping somebody's not gonna wanna put a massive flagpole on top of the building. Not seen that before, but maybe that could do it. I don't think I'd rather not have that happen, so I'm,
I don't wanna deal with a flagpole that comes in like the one we just got. Did you see remember the sign?
Yeah.
No.
oh,
Yeah.
25
Out in the industrial
flagpole.
park.
yeah, which we said no to. Height, didn't we?
We tabled it.
Restricted
Tabled
it.
Yeah, but if it's excluded.
But, yeah. So so we'll take, why don't we look at numbers 1 through 8 to start with? And,
Well, one way to deal with that would be if somebody is inclined to say, look, I'd like to see 1 through 8 approved with the clarification that village staff adds language, and we don't have it right now, but I think theoretically we know what it is, but 55 is a hard cap, nothing can go above 55 feet. That if that somebody wants to make that motion, then that's what, we can do that. We don't have to bring it back to you. In other words, the 1 through 8 could be approved with every section having that additional language added, saying 55 feet is a hard cap.
okay. I also think that the people could put their mechanicals within their 25%.
I think that's exactly what Hubby did, so, yeah.
So,
So including mechanicals,
mhm.
25% including mechanicals.
No, if they're wanting to put their mechanicals in, so it's not on top, if
Right.
they'd have to have a spot, they can put it right next to their party room or whatever you wanna call it. But when you get into stairwell, elevator, mechanicals, you're probably taking quite a bit.
It's not
I don't
a
know,
space
but,
So hard cap, 55, 25%,
The 25%'s already in there.
25%'s there.
30-foot setback. That's.
Those, the last two are already in, though.
I know, but I'm
Okay.
just talking.
Okay, yeah, all right.
in the Review. Is that, or,
It's hard cap. You want me to make that motion?
not that smart.
Okay, so we'd have a motion that we'd need to make for something here. So we can completely say, no, we're not gonna do this, leave as is, right?
You can?
Yeah, I can make a try at it.
Do
Okay,
you
go
want
ahead.
Brian to?
The maximum height's 45 feet with a 55 feet exception if, for 25% maximum.
Okay, can I ask this? If you, I mean, the only thing that I was proposing the change to the language that's in your packet is to add a phrase that says, you know, the height of the building shall not exceed 55 feet, and this is a hard cap, no exceptions. If that's what you're comfortable with, then I think it would be a motion to approve sections 1 through 8 of the proposed ordinance change with.
As recommended by
As
the
recommended by the
village
village attorney. That's what-
attorney.
If you want to make more changes than just that, you should tell us what you want, and we should bring it back to you, because it's gonna get more complicated. But if it's just that one change, just the hard cap, then I think you can go ahead and do that tonight.
What about the parking thing?
Well, that's
That's
gonna be a
coming-
separate
that's coming
code.
up.
It's a different.
Yeah.
Yep, you're off.
All right,
This is 1 through 8.
I just don't wanna forget that.
Phil, do you wanna make that motion?
So I'm looking at this here, and it says under Part A, the height of the building shall not exceed 55 feet. And you're going to add, and that is a hard cap.
I'm gonna add
That
language to
nature.
make clear that nothing can be above 55 feet, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna there's a section of the code right now that allows an exception, and we're gonna make clear that exception would not allow for anything to go over 55 feet. It is a 55-foot cap, nothing can be over 55 feet.
So can I
Yeah.
add something to that, please? I just want to make sure we're aware and maybe figure out how to deal with the issue that your building height, as defined in the ordinance, and this is a very common approach, is it depends on the roof style. And a gable roof, like most houses have, the height as measured, as defined by your ordinance, is the midpoint between the peak and the eave.
So the Main and Madison Street example, how they're just sloped like that.
Yeah, so the height as defined by the ordinance is the midpoint, not the peak. And so if we're saying, well, building height up to 55 feet, but hard cap at 55, I just want us all to be clear that we're talking about that 55 is an exception to the way you measure building height everywhere else. Because I think what you're intending then is that peak has to be under 55. I don't want you to be surprised that it comes back and it's actually at 60 because it's a 10-foot span from the eave to the peak. And your ordinance defines height as the midpoint.
As we said now, the Hobby building is gonna be shorter than Main and Madison.
Because of what you're talking
Oh, it's
about.
free to go.
Yes, right,
That's
because
correct.
it does not have
Right.
I guess my thoughts are, we're talking about housing a lot, we're on the housing task force, and we are being restrictive if not,
Which increases costs.
yeah.
They don't.
I don't wanna make it so impossible for anyone to bring in new housing if that's something that we've set as a priority right now.
From
Affordable housing.
Yeah.
an apartment building type setting
yeah.
is what you're getting at. Okay?
Okay, so as with that change that we talked about, 55 feet, you're wording it, yeah, fine,
So you're making that motion?
yes.
Okay, do we have a second?
Can we repeat it? I just wanna make
Go
sure.
ahead.
So, I mean, the motion is approve sections 1 through 8 as to be revised by the village attorney. The revision is gonna be, but I'm going on record to tell you, the revision is gonna be to this section A, where it says the height of the building shall not exceed 55 feet. And when I'm gonna add language that says that 55 feet is a cap. And I'm gonna refer to there's a current section of the code that right now allows things like spires and mechanicals and penthouses to be above whatever the height restriction as approved by the plan commission. And what I understand Chris to say and what Phil's motion to be is the language that's gonna be added is gonna say those exceptions don't apply, and we're dealing with a 55-foot cap for the total height of the building, which would include mechanicals, things of that nature. And like, the easiest example is the elevator penthouse is not gonna be able to be above 55 feet.
Do we need to do something with Hovde because of the
No, I don't
We've already
believe,
done
I think
this.
everything for Hovde is below 55 feet.
suggested by?
So we have a motion by Phil. Do we have any seconds?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second by Bill. I'm gonna just ask for clarification then on one thing. Your comment. Will that mean the 55 feet is from the middle, or will it be hard line, it can't be over that at the peak?
I think it's the rule is based on what is in the existing code. So if roof lines are measured differently based under the existing code, you look at how the measurement is under the existing code, and that's the 55-foot mark.
Unless you want to specifically.
Unless you don't want the existing code language to apply.
But our practice for the last 30 years is that we have an average, that's how we've been measuring the heights. I'd hate for us to change that.
And for example, that would be in place right now. So theoretically, you could have a building, I'm gonna make sure I'm stating this correctly. You could have a building that, depending on its roof line, without a CUP, is over 45 feet in height, if you measure it, because when you look at the language in the code, and I think this is pretty standard for municipalities, depending on what type of roof line you have, that's the measurement is different. And so theoretically, because you take the average, part of that roof line could be over 45 feet, and you wouldn't even need a conditional use permit right now.
Are we, yeah, I'm just thinking, we're not putting an amenity on that type of roof.
True. I mean, I
So
think.
it's gonna be.
So it may not matter. Yeah.
Because it's not.
We're not gonna do that, so. I'm assuming, I don't know how you'd put an amenity, I guess, if you had I don't even know what you could do. So I don't think that would come into play. with what we've done. So, okay, so we have a motion and a second. So the motion was by Phil, second was Bill?
Bill.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, I'll call to question for numbers 1 through 8 with the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay. Number 9.
Number 9, so 9, we've had some discussion on it. Whenever I've read the sentence that I proposed, I always saw nodding. So, and that sentence again places a restriction that to the extent that you have a project that is going to rely on an adjacent parcel that it was within 500 feet to, for example, satisfy parking or stormwater, you cannot go into a residential zoning district. You have to stay in non-residential zoning districts to utilize essentially the adjacent parcel. And so the sentence is, it's added to the language that's already on page 58, bleeding into page 59, and it would go in right at the end. Notwithstanding the preceding sentences, the adjacent parcel or parcels shall not be located in a residential zoning district. And so to the extent that someone's willing to the motion, it would be a motion to approve section 9 as stated in the packet with the addition of that sentence.
I'd so move.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Okay, any other conversation?
Oh, and a little bit of clarification. In order to do that, it's still something that would have to go through the plan commission. It'd still have to be approved.
Correct.
Wherever it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a discretionary decision.
Okay, any other comments? So we have our motion and second. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Number 10.
Last one is, so now I'm skipping ahead to page 79 of the packet. This is the section 10 that, and you know, when I'm looking at this, we also identified the purposes for the changes. That would be part of the ordinance, but based on the recommendation from the Plan Commission and some public comments that we had, we made some changes to section 10D2B to try to get some clarification. And so what the staff is recommending and what the motion would be in this case would be motion to approve section 10 as shown on page 79 of the packet.
And that's the one that says the maximum height of the building located in the less restricted district may not be increased by a conditional use.
Yeah, we added that language, correct.
Yeah, I really like that because
Step back.
it gives it a lot more teeth.
That's the.
I make a motion, we approve that one as written.
Second.
Motion by Phil, second by Bill. Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Did you say nay? So we have
5 and 1.
5 and 1. Okay. Moving on. I can find my sheet here. There it is. Okay, next under new business, we have consultation of American Legion Property Development TIF request. Should I remove now or after I read?
3D.
I think you can read it, but then my understanding is you're gonna recuse yourself from both the open session and closed session, which means you get to go,
I get to go start my DVR.
oh, I don't know if we're going to.
Yeah, we don't even know if we're going to closed session at this point, so.
No.
2420.
There's 24-20 for the
No,
Brewer game?
football.
Holy cow. Not much pitching. All right, consultation of American Legion property TIF request. The village board may convene in a closed session as authorized by Wisconsin statute 19.851E for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business. Whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require closed session, the village board may reconvene in open session to discuss and take action on subject matter discussed in closed section. I need a motion to go into closed
Well, no,
session.
my understanding is there's gonna be an open session presentation, and then there's the potential to go into closed session, but.
You may or may not
Okay,
even go to
so
closed
then we
session.
need a motion for somebody to chair while I'm out.
Yes.
I move Sue chair of the meeting.
Second.
Can I do this? So motion by Phil, second by Bill. Sue to be the chair. I will be recusing myself as I have for all meetings and information regarding LZ management, development, whatever those are. Thank you, board members, for all your work tonight.
Thank you.
I will be leaving,
Get out of here.
and I appreciate.
Oh, I get it now.
Yeah, you do.
I get it now.
Did that just hit you?
Yeah, I was a little slow.
Want to take on that?
Oh,
want
good,
up
I'm
on
glad
the
people are
screen?
coming back. I was gonna say,
Oh, yeah, I can do that.
purpose of this was so they'd be.
Enjoy your chicken.
Yeah. I hope it's crispy.
So,
I'm leaving. Wait for me to get out, so.
Okay.
And I'm pulling up their PowerPoint.
Did you put that in record?
Yes.
Exams.
Good night, Chris.
We're gonna miss. Jeez,
I see it.
it's 4-0.
You'll miss them.
We are.
How was the event in Chicago?
It was amazing. I'll have to show you
All
photos.
kinds of companies were there?
No, there was only like 50 people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was really small.
I guess it's not the most exciting thing.
did
It's
you
not
have
like
like-
Disney.
For me, it was.
Don't you smile. You're on my probationary list.
I've been on that for 40 years.
Okay, because it
Went to
wasn't.
school with
You ready?
younger kids.
Really?
Okay, we're gonna have a
2-year-olds.
presentation first. And do you want to introduce yourself when you're?
Thank you. Well, thank you for staying later and hearing us out again. My name is Dan Zellner. I'm with LZ Management Company. It's a local Madison-based real estate development firm. I'm one of the 5 partners. Andrew is here as well. He's one of the partners as well. We're both residents of Waunakee. Actually, both grew up here as well and brought our families back. What we're talking about here tonight is we've been working with the American Legion for the last 18 months. And what we've been trying to accomplish with them is, one, help them solve their long-term facility needs by finding them a new location within the village, and then also figuring out what we can develop on their current property that makes sense for the village at this time. Our intent is to share the current plan and just start the discussion here with you all about the type of assistance we're going to need to be able to complete this project, and just kind of start that discussion now. I know some of you have heard this several times already, but I'll try to fly through I just want to give background to people that haven't, don't know who we are yet. So, LZ Management, 5 partners, like I said, over 100 years of combined experience in construction and real estate development, 55 years in various high-level roles at one of the largest general contractors in the state. 3 of the 5 members grew up in Waunakee, and the 4th currently lives here. I think we're local in the truest sense of the word, but we have the expertise to carry out the type of project that we're going to be talking about tonight. I'll just get into the pictures. So right now we manage and own 6 properties ranging from $12 to $30 million. And I'll just show you pictures of those because that gives you, the type of scope that we're used to dealing with. So that's Grand Central Apartments. That's our largest building. It's 14 stories right across from the UW Business School on campus. Exo One Apartments is actually kitty corner to Grand Central on the same block. That's an 8-story building. Between the two, there's 800 beds that we serve students at. This is the Foundry Apartments. This is an 82-unit market rate apartment project over in Greenway Station in Middleton. That was just completed in 2006. This is the Deco Apartments. We just completed this this summer with the last phase. It's 173 units over off Junction Road, across from the Panera, where everybody used to park over there. I don't know if you're probably familiar with that. We took the parking lot. That was the overflow. There's still parking. It's actually the parking garage. You can go in the parking garage if you need to. Not many people know that. But these are just other projects that we've been involved with. So you can just see that, we're going to show a rendering later. We're used to dealing with this type of, this size of a project. So, just give a little background on how we got here. In May of 2007, we approached the Legion and just said, we were looking for areas to develop in town. Both being from here, and my house is actually backed up to the creek. I've always liked 6 Mile Creek lot. They have a very pretty parcel, it's 4 acres, right on the creek. So we just said, would you be interested in selling? And they said, actually, yes, we've been looking at potentially moving for the last several years. So that kind of kicked off a collaboration where we were trying to help them find a new location for their building, and then also trying to figure out what exactly we're going to put on their current lot. In January of 2008, they decided to settle on Lot 11 in the MLG Business Park. I'll show you where that is exactly, as something that they wanted to pursue. So we did a presentation similar to this to their entire board. We were working with just a subset of their leadership team at the time. So then we presented to their board in January of 2018 and kind of got initial go-ahead that everybody was on board to continue on in the process. They had an all-Legion member vote that just kind of, it was non-binding. It was just exploratory to see if they had support of the members, and they had overwhelming support to continue on in the process to pursue moving to Lot 11. September 15th, we went from the Plan Commission meeting. We have some deadlines that I'll be talking about later that we needed to kind of get the process moving. So we went from the Plan Commission, just initial consultation about rezoning the Legion's current property. Last Thursday, October 11th, we got in front of the entire Legion crew again and did a presentation, and they're going to be voting in November about whether they want to pursue this purchase agreement with LZ. So that's not completed yet, but again, because of some of the deadlines, we kind of got to move on parallel paths here with getting some of these conversations started, so that we can meet our deadline. I think, so just to be clear, the Legion has not approved us buying their land, but I think there's good support there, and I think the leaders think that they'll have, the numbers that they need to move along, but we won't know until November. And then obviously here tonight, talking a little bit what we need from the village. So just an overview of kind of the deal that we have, or that we're trying to carry out with the Legion is they can't have a mortgage. So we're going to give them enough money to then buy Lot 11 and build a new building there, so they can own that free and clear. So that would solve their long-term facility needs. They have a brand new building. The building would be more accessible. I don't know if you've been to their fish fries or whatnot right now, but the current building is great. It's got a lot of history to it, but there's a lot of steps, and it's hard for some of the older members to move from floor to floor. It'd create more usable open space, for their fish fry and other hosted events there. And then they're going to have the ability to create amenities that they feel is going to attract new members, because there's a lot of veterans in the village that aren't necessarily members yet. A lot of them wait until the kids move out and they have a little more time, but they're trying to get those folks in earlier to be involved. So Lot 11 is over here. This is Hogan Road, Highway 19. You can't see it, but so that's where it's right on the corner. So the ice rink is right here, so they would be right across the way from the ice rink. So what do we want to do? Let me just make sure there's nothing else I want to touch on here. So really, it's really two projects in one. We can't do our project unless we get the Legion's projects completed, because they have to have we're not going to kick them out, make them homeless. They need a place to stay before we do anything with their current lot. But the development that we came up with, and it was in consultation with, Todd and Kevin have been great, just kind of going back and forth about what potentially would work here. And we've talked to the neighbors that are adjoining the lot, and just gotten a sense from the community about what people think might be good use for this space. And what we came upon is a senior affordable apartment, similar to Cannery Row. Kevin had that up earlier. That was built in 2002, and I don't believe there's been no senior independent living apartments built since 2002. And with it would be very similar where you have the senior center, village center, you have Cannery Row, right? You're putting in the new library. This would be across the creek with a bridge to the new library. So 100 units is what we need, and a lot of that is based on just the numbers for the type of program that we're using to finance this. Once you get below 100 units, it's really hard to make the math work. So that is kind of a number that we need to stay at, and we can't move too much from, again, to make the math work. The majority of the units are going to be for residents meeting certain affordability criteria. So different units will have different median income levels. So some of the units will be someone that's making 100% of the median area income. Some of them will be 80%, 60, 40, etc. So there's going to be a range of different income levels that live in here as we're, envisioning it right now. Another thing that we think is pretty cool is, we'd like to retain the Legion's legacy on this property in some way. And one way that we think would be a really cool way of doing that is to set aside a certain amount of the units for veterans and or their spouses. So you can't legally say that veterans only can live there, but you can give them preferential treatment in the application process. So that's something that we really would be excited to do and think would be a great fit for that property. So I'm going to show some renderings. People get excited about the pictures and what we might be showing now. The main point of this was, we had ADCI, which is a well-known architectural firm in Madison, look at this, and the main things we wanted to do is, can we fit 100 units on this property? It's 4 acres, but when you actually look at the buildable acreage, it gets a lot smaller because you have the creek there, you have 100-year flood lines that you kind of got to deal with, and then you have the residential housing, similar, relevant discussion that you were just having with the houses that line Main Street there. So what we're trying to, again, so this is preliminary, but it shows you how 100 units could lay out on this space. And what we're trying to do is move it away from these houses as much as possible. The one comment that we got from some of the houses here is they have a driveway that goes out the back into the Legion's parking lot right now. I don't know if that's legal or how that happened, but we don't want to take away someone's, like this woman here, they said she just moved 2 years ago. One of the reasons they bought the house is because they have the garage there. So we don't want to take that away, and I think we probably could come up with a solution with how we have this laid out right now. And again, it's back from the houses as much as we possibly can. So those houses obviously are not involved in our redevelopment plan. And I actually think it creates a nice little buffer actually between Main Street and our project, because the creek lines it on the other side of the building, and there's some pretty tall, these are pretty large trees here, so I think it'll kind of shield some of the building from Main Street. And our thoughts on the design initially is just, we wanted something that blends in. It's got a beautiful natural setting, so we wanted to create something that kind of blends in to that area. Here's just this is looking from kind of this angle from here, basically, view. So again, trying to blend it into the area. Andrew, did you have anything to on this? I'm a CPA by training, so this the construction and design is I'm learning, but I don't know as much as some others in the room. So I'll admit my limitations on this. So what are some of the benefits of this to the village and Legion? So it's affordable housing option to village residents. Again, this is for seniors, so it's going to be 55 plus. It's going to solve the long-term facility needs of the American Legion and its members. It's going to provide units within the village specifically for veterans, which I don't believe that's something that we have right now. It's going to unlock the taxable value of the Legion's current property, so the Legion does not pay property taxes on their property. They're tax exempt. It's going to bring users for the new library and existing senior center to within walking distance. For sure walking distance to the library, even in winter, maybe not the senior center, but in summer, yes. Additional residents and visitors to, villages emerging downtown. One thing that we have not done any traffic studies yet. We're, trying to get through the Legion's approval process. But one thing we like about this type of building is that we don't think it's going to bring as much traffic as a normal apartment building will. I drop my kids off at St. John's every morning and go by Cannery Row, and there's not much activity there at 7:30, 8 o'clock. So we think this will be very similar. And again, one of the reasons that we thought this would be a good fit based on everything else that's going on downtown. So just timeline going forward. So we've met with the neighbors that line Main Street, but we want to have a larger community meeting and share some of this information with those same neighbors and open it up to a larger group of community members. We haven't decided when that's going to happen yet, but it's going to be in early November. And honestly, part of the reason was we wanted to share this with you before we start talking to a ton of people about it. November 15th is going to be the Legion's final vote, so that's when they'll approve the purchase agreement to go forward. December 14th is the most important date from our perspective. So how we're gonna finance this is an application through WIDA, and their low-income housing tax credit program. And that has a competitive application process that the due date is December 14th. So everything we're doing is kind of moving towards that date. If we miss that date, you have to wait a whole year to apply again. So it's an important date to meet. If we do, we'll find out in February, March of 2019 if we win that WIDA award of tax credits, and then there'll be a long process of going through due diligence, coming in here, getting the building design finalized, things like that. So really, the most important thing right now, and again, that's why I kind of went over the renderings pretty quickly, is we need to get certain things done to get the application in, and then if we win it, if we find out if we win on the application, then you go through the rest of the process at that point. Because if we don't win those awards, the project doesn't work. So these are things that we need to do prior to the December 14th application due date. We need to get the Legion's current property rezoned. We need to come to an agreement with the village about the TIF that we're gonna need to complete the project. And based on calculations, and we're working with Baker Tilly, who does a lot of these projects, working with them, what we need to make the project work is, an estimate of 70% of the total property tax increment over 25 years. So I think that TIF district that was just set up was 27 years. So we would have to use most of those to get the benefit we need upfront to make the project work. And, I'm sure you've heard of the but-for test, not gonna give us TIF unless we have a legitimate reason to use it. And there's two reasons we need it. And the first is the math just doesn't work. These projects are very tight, and they just don't work unless you have some sort of public assistance. I don't think any of these projects work unless you get some funding from the city, village, or town that you're trying to get the development done in. And two, the way that the application is set up, it's not subjective at all. It's a completely objective application. There's certain scoring thresholds, and if you check the box, you get 10 points versus 6 points. And so kind of going in what your point total is gonna be. And Baker Tilly does a ton of these applications, so they have a very good sense of what would be a successful application. And they're telling us that if we get the amount of TIF that we need, we're gonna be 60 to 70% chances of winning, or better, depending on how we can kind of manage some other things. So it's very important for, one, to make the math work, but two, also just to have the application be competitive. And then the third thing we need is just a letter of support from the village for the Legion's relocation to Lot 11. And that's geared towards the application too. WIDA's gonna wanna know that we have control of the Legion's property. So if part of our purchase agreement is contingent on the Legion moving to Lot 11, they're gonna want some teeth or some evidence that that's actually going to happen. So just getting a letter of support from the village would help us out in that regard. And I just wanted to blow through it quickly so we get into questions, but that's all I had prepared. Would welcome any questions or comments.
Any questions from members of the board?
Can we go back to the sort of the site map that you have there? As far as what's there right now, what is the current zoning?
It's institutional, I believe.
Institutional.
And all the homes are one?
That was commercial.
I have it up.
They're not C1D.
Change that to commercial.
It was in the town, it was in that plan, right?
And so you're looking to have it rezoned from institutional to
Something that would allow 100 units, yeah.
whatever that might happen?
Yeah, we're not gonna.
R2.
The homes are R2?
Yeah.
Okay.
You would do it to senior housing, wouldn't you zone it to
Then
that?
on to the next one, do you
Yeah.
have a feel for what that height is?
It's right around.
Given our discussions that we just had.
We were just talking about it, it's right around 45 feet. It might be a foot or two higher, but that's part of the reason we went with the flat roof.
Okay.
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
That's another thing to remember, you're gonna get a lot of flat roofs.
And again, that's just a initial rendering of what it could look like.
Given the things that we just passed.
That's what we were talking about.
Yeah, we're just talking about it. We have to analyze it.
And
Yeah.
they obviously built this with what was under
Sure.
current,
Sure.
or they designed it based on what's under current code.
Does it meet or not meet?
Can't tell.
Can't tell.
So how many is the average square feet and what are you guys projecting there?
I don't remember exactly.
Square feet of the units or? the-
Yeah.
Square
square
feet.
feet.
Probably
It's,
vary.
it's, excuse me, I'm sorry, it's 50, we have 51 bedrooms, 52 bedrooms built into it currently, based off of WIDA's history of other projects within Dane County. We've taken average of that, and the exact numbers I can get you, but I don't know.
So it's something like that.
It's about 28 units, second, third, and fourth floor. So I put you about 14 units on the first floor then, 14, 16 units on the first floor. We have we have some community space that we designated as block planning on the first floor. And then we have about, of the 100 units, we have about 70, mid-70 range for underground parking stalls. And then approximately in total, about 150 parking stalls in total for the whole project.
So amenities would be community room.
Correct. We still have to measure that to a point of what the community amenities will be. But one of the, if I may add, is one of the big things when we put on the site plan was pushing it away from the homes. Off Main Street was a big thing, reducing the height and making sure we have a flat roof, pushing back and making a majority of those units, just conceptually, livable wise, being on the creek and having that aspect on the back part of the lot.
Looks like
Any other questions?
Do you have enough space for water? For the drainage,
For stormwater, honestly, the calculation hasn't been done yet, but we were looking at a couple different options. From an EDS underground system, there's other potential, but we honestly have not explored this much. Depends on how much impervious we have around on the site.
I mean, this'll have more grass than it currently does even. Because if, right now, the building here, and there's a parking lot that lines the entire building.
in circles.
You guys can step it back 45 feet.
Other questions? Todd?
Wanted to get a clarification on something you said earlier about how you're gonna proceed with the Legion onto Lot 11. In our really early discussions, my impression was that you were going to do the turnkey build for them. Is that what you're, I don't know if I heard you right. I heard you say we're gonna give them the money and then they're gonna go do their thing, or?
Well, we're gonna help them through the process. Yeah, so we're not, it's a two-part project for us. We're gonna help them do that. We're not gonna leave them homeless. So part of this for Andrew and I is we're as excited to help them out as we are about this project. So we think it's gonna be, they're celebrating their 100-year anniversary next year in the village. So it'd be pretty cool if we could get a building for them set up.
You're doing a turnkey.
In essence, we
Again,
are.
this was a sticking point at the Legion's meeting because people mean turnkey different things.
Oh,
The reason I'm bringing it up is, and very early out of the gate when you guys started considering Lot 11 for the Legion use, is I had clarified the importance of that as an entry point to the park, and that there'd be some expectations of design standards that are gonna be, somewhat serious.
Sure.
And I just wanna make sure that's still gonna be understood and cared for in the process.
Sure, and we communicated that to
Okay.
them when we were discussing.
To answer your question in further on the turnkey, our goal is to walk through this whole process with them and use the expertise of our years with them, because they ask the same question. We're gonna do everything in our power. They're still gonna own the building, still gonna own the lot. We're gonna assist them with the years of experience we have to build the most economical, best looking, highest quality, most efficient building we possibly can for the American Post 360.
And some of that's timing too, if we want to bring this online, preferably spring, early summer, just based on leasing cycles. And it's about a year build, so if we get everything lined up by August of next year, we won't even necessarily want to start our project until February-ish. So that would give us 3 or 4 months to get their project completed prior to us doing anything on our lot, so. But we also want the flexibility where if we have to start them both at the same time, like, so that's why it's turnkey. When you say turnkey, it's not like they're gonna have that necessarily immediately upon, you know, us starting our project, if that makes sense.
Other questions? Not, are we going into
I think that's what we're just talking about. I don't know if there's a need for it to go into
this
closed
point?
session.
There's nothing.
Well, what I was looking, what I'm interested in from the board, it doesn't have to happen in closed session, but the question is, are you comfortable with the village taking steps to engage our financial advisors in a review process of their data, their pro forma data? That's gonna be, that'll be a process. We'd be asking them to make commitments to provide compensation, to cover expenses related to that research. So that's what I wanna see. If you guys are green light, let me back up a second.
Yeah, you're not approving the project, you're approving moving forward with the process, and the first step in the process is to get our financial advisors involved, even though they're gonna have to reimburse us for that cost. But if you're not comfortable moving forward with the process, now would be the time to say so.
Yeah, so my backing up is, if you don't have an appetite for this project today along the timing lines that they laid out, tell us now so they can stop and we can stop. But if you're comfortable with this project, keeping in mind that we're in the midst of a housing study, I want to bring that up legitimately, because data's in flux in this, if this is the case.
So the Knights, not Knights, the Legion, are they like, have they said publicly yet that they're doing this at any way, or that they're interested in this?
They're voting in November. So
They're voting,
November,
so there has been no other.
I mean, they were with us at the plan commission, so they, you know, they're involved and they know what's going on.
Not a secret.
It's just not official.
It's not official.
They've notified
And they
them.
haven't, their leadership team can't make final decisions tonight.
They're all voting,
They're voting.
and then you can bring it to
I'm just
open.
wondering, they
Right,
said
but we have
there
to,
can
because of the
we
December 14th, we kind of got to do this.
Right.
and
I just
then-
don't want to appear like we're forcing them into.
Correct.
No, and we've told, at the Thursday meeting, we told them we're gonna be here talking about it, but it just, so that we can continue to move forward if they approve on November.
So on all of our projects, we have Paragon do an analysis when there's a request, and you guys are aware of that.
Yep, yep.
Even though Baker Tilly's doing some of your other numbers, which are more in-depth because of the tax credit.
Right.
And so the question is everybody in support of that step? We still have to look at design and site plan and all those other issues, that's part of it.
Well, and I would say that what is being requested up there can be done by December 14th. You can have a rezone of property that, for example, would be conditioned upon the sale of the land by the Legion to the developer. You can have a conditional agreement that's gonna say, the agreement goes into effect if the land is sold. But the one thing that the village is gonna have to retain authority on is, even if we have the conditional rezone and even if we have a conditional pay-go agreement, the issue that you raised, Sue, on we retain all of our authority on site plan review and architecture and all those things. And so there is the potential that they could, both of those, all of that happens right there, that the developer is able to get their funding, but the project doesn't go forward because one reason or another, the village says, hey, for this to go forward, building height. We've obviously had a lot of discussion about building height. That could play a role. Other site plan issues. I just want to make sure that would be built in.
I think we have to tell them, you need to analyze before anybody incurs any cost, that they're gonna meet whatever our zoning requirement is, so that, I don't want them to move forward, and then you say, we just passed something, you can't build it, well, we might as well know that.
Correct. I don't think that there's any way that they would have all of those plans prepared by that December 14th date. And so I'm kind of letting everyone know that would be built in. In other words, we're not gonna be able to review their documents before that deadline.
And we're
They
not-
need the zoning in place before the 14th of December. One thing we've talked about is putting a restriction on this property that would go along with that zoning. That would restrict it to 55 and older, so we're not doing a market rate type of housing, that this is gonna be restricted to a senior housing.
And affordable, right?
I think that's the level of details we're gonna have to get into.
Okay, now, I've got a silly question. Well, it's not to me, but, normally, when we set up a TIF, the purchase price, what the property is valued at is one thing, and then the increment is the difference. Now, this is a non-tax property. Are we going to be, at us and the schools and et cetera, are they gonna get taxed on what they're paying a down payment to the Legion for? And the difference is the increment? Is there gonna be any taxes going into the schools, et cetera, on this property at all until it's up?
It would all be increment.
Correct. All would be
Total thing will be increment. It's a little different.
There's zero,
There's no,
if the Legion
nothing
stays
going
there,
to
no.
anybody.
I know,
No.
wherever.
but there's also no TIF.
This land is
No,
tipped right
it's
now.
already
I-
in the
TIF.
TIF.
Well, it's not drawing anything,
There's no taxable,
you know,
There's nothing going to school
Yeah.
right,
now.
for us,
Yeah,
for
the-
anyone.
It's not going to anybody.
right.
Barely anything is gonna. But I guess am I correct? I mean, there's no way that we're gonna have architectural review and site plan and things of that nature done by December 14th.
Assessment a year now.
No, and I don't.
Yeah,
that-
and that's
it.
fine, I don't think that we have to, I just wanna make it, the village, I mean, everyone understand that whatever would be built into that agreement, we're not giving up any of our, review authority, so it is theoretically possible that we can get these things in place, that the developer can get its funding, and yet the project would not go forward, because for one reason or another, the plan commission or the village board said that the plan that you are now that we have more detail on it, it's not gonna work from our standpoint,
Well-
you need to make these changes.
They can have their architects work towards our requirements too. I don't think that's impossible, given what I've seen.
Correct.
Well, Phil, I've got a different angle to your question. I'm shifting you to the other side of the village. There is a small impact. The Legion's property, once purchased on Lot 11, will become tax exempt.
Yeah.
It's currently valued, granted, it's
It's only
it's
farmland.
ag and it's,
Yeah, it's
you know,
nothing.
minimal, but there is something foregone in that, which is potential value in the, in TID 2.
As-
TID
as-
2? Is it TID 3, is it? Although there's only a couple years left
Yeah.
on that district, so there's something negligible there. But I just wanted to point out that
Yeah.
that's a factor.
Yeah, I'm just sure that issue is all gonna come up when the, other, entities vote on this.
They won't.
They
Oh,
won't,
You don't need
it's
to.
already.
Oh, that's right, it's
done,
already
yeah.
approved, that's right, I'm
The only
sorry.
issue related to TIF they would be working on with them is a development agreement, which probably would have a couple of contingencies related to other steps in.
No
their
kids,
process.
though.
So they're not gonna generate kids for the school district,
Low cost for them.
which is good.
But I mean, I appreciate that question. I'm sure other people are wondering
Yeah.
those logistics to the decision.
I believe the other fact too that we talked about was rezoning it will have there should not be any negative impact towards the Legion for any future use other than that type of use, correct?
Is the zoning going to happen at the time it's not gonna happen in December? Is it a contingent zoning? Is that acceptable? I mean, how does that work?
It would have to be rezoned by December 14th.
Actually rezone,
Well,
not contingent.
I guess I would wanna talk to you guys, but, I mean, the action by the village board, I mean, it's common, common may be too strong, but it definitely happens where the village board would rezone the property. So any action that's needed by the village board would take place before December 14th. The rezone would not go into effect until the Legion actually sold the property to the developer. So that means, so then if the property's never sold, then the zoning's never changed. My belief would be that WIDA would be satisfied because you as the developer would have the rezoning that you would need, and the only contingency would be your acquisition of the property, but your acquisition of the property has to be, WIDA's relying on that to give you your loan. I guess that's something I'd wanna talk through with you, because I think that would be the cleanest thing for the village. Otherwise, the village would potentially be in a position where you rezone the property, where there's a deed restriction, but then if the project doesn't move forward, then the village has got to come back and probably rezone it back to what the institutional or whatever it is right now.
That sounds fine. I mean, that
Okay.
Sounds good to me, but Baker Tilly would be, we could talk to them about it too.
Can you remind me, what is your anticipated value, assessed value guess?
I think it was like 9.5 million. I talked to the gentleman that does a lot of the assessments in the
Okay.
village, and based on what he was telling me, it was like 9.5 for this type of project.
Even based on your financing with tax credit
That's, he,
or NOI?
yeah, NOI, yep.
Okay. Well, that all has to work out anyway, that's all, otherwise it doesn't come together.
Right.
I mean, you could find out that your costs have gone up so high, you can't make the deal work too, given what's going on out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of things
There's
that
a
could.
lot of contingencies if you're waiting that long to start a project.
Well, if the board's inclined to make a motion to instruct staff to proceed in working the fiscal analysis related to the potential TIF request, that would then send us into our any other aspect to a motion that, yeah, so a motion to proceed with the fiscal analysis on their potential TIF request is what we'd be looking for.
I'll make that motion to proceed on the fiscal analysis on the site.
Do you have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. No need for closed session?
Nope.
For one last motion?
I move we adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
It's nice to be appreciated.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I don't know.
The Brewers are about to adjourn.